Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the special council meeting of Thursday, November 12th. We'll call the meeting to order. Can I get a motion, please, for the adoption of the agenda? Moved by Councillor Vail, seconded by Councillor Richardson. All in favor? That's passed. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest in anything on today's agenda? Seeing none, we don't have any deputations or correspondence. We'll move right into item 6, which is presentations. It's a proposed 2021 tax support capital budget presentation. I'll turn it over to CAO Ron Taylor to introduce us in before we go. Go ahead.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and hopefully you'll indulge a bit of our sort of abnormal approach to this. We've got a number of staff here in the chamber, obviously respecting distancing and so on. We'll have a number of speakers walk you through a presentation. Our intent today is really to just give you an opening of our 2021 capital program, and as part of that, we're going to talk a little bit more about the elements of that program. And I certainly don't need to tell you that this has been an unprecedented year in everything that we do, sort of municipally, and that includes sort of how we do these projects and certainly our budgets. Originally, when the state of emergency was put in place, as you know, we really didn't know where we were heading. We didn't know in terms of timing. And so in the summertime, when we provided a brief update, we were getting ready to get into our budgets for 2021. And obviously, we had other things to stay focused on. And council agreed that we would deliberate all of our budgets for 2021 next year in the first quarter. And sort of since then, as we've continued on, we've seen more value in bringing forward to you a capital budget earlier rather than early next year. And so this is the first sort of formal touch point with you. It's also the opportunity through you to the public to share the draft 2021 proposed budget from staff. We're recommending that you deliberate this budget on December 1st, and then we can take advantage of some opportunities to be able to move forward into our 2021 capital program. I do want to say, because of the changes and shifts, and I want to just commend all of the departments, but in particular the team that you're going to hear from today. I think there was a lot of sleepless nights when they were planning on doing a budget in January and February. And then we said, hey, let's launch it to the public November 1st and have it out there and deliberate it within a month. So they're still smiling, so I'm still smiling. You're going to hear about some of our financial position relative to our long-term financial plan, which is our sort of normal standard fare. And then we want to talk very specifically about what's different in this particular budget document this year, and why we're proposing what we're doing. The theme, I think, is going to be a catch-up year in 2021 to really get back to those committed projects that we wanted to finish and complete this year, but at the same time, sort of accelerating or continuing to move forward on our capital investments that this council has sort of stated as a high priority year over year. Again, in terms of catching up, so what you're going to hear today, normally you would get a proposed tax support capital budget, and it would outline new projects, it would bring forward funding opportunities and options for you, and you would adopt that budget, and it would be a new program heading into next year. The difference this year, your document, I'm going to walk you through it a little bit later today, is really in 3 parts. It highlights all of those 2020, this year's projects that we had to delay for a number of reasons. Many of them we've now started late year, but they're going to continue on next year. Some of them we had to defer entirely, and we're still planning on starting those in 2021. The next piece is going to be what I term new spending. So it's the new 2021 capital projects that we want to add to that program. And then the third piece of your book highlights, based on these revisions and recommendations, Obviously, we had other projects that we were thinking or planning for, or you were expecting in the 2021 budget that we are recommending at least should be considered for deferral to a future year. So we want to talk through all of those three different elements with you. And I guess lastly, I'll just say, Mr. Mayor, that when we were midstream in this pandemic, I know we collectively had a number of discussions, and I think the number one priority and then the direction that you provided as council to us was we really wanted to make a priority being in a strong financial position whenever this pandemic ends or we're in a recovery phase. And so you directed us to bring forward and manage the current budget with a target of break even at year end. And I'm very pleased to say that we continue to stay on that track. But I do acknowledge that it's not easy, and I'm not saying that from a staff perspective. It's not easy for all of us and the public. It meant some services we didn't get to, so we didn't deliver them like people expected. It also meant we had to forego a lot of revenue that we were expecting or relying on. So as a result of that, we had to make some very quick cuts internally to our operations in order to offset that. And I've provided updates to you before. The order of magnitude is probably about $6 million collectively that we had to manage in order to get to that break-even point, but we still seem to be trending in the right direction. So I just wanted to leave you with that, Mr. Mayor, and if you're okay, I want to turn it over to Adam Found. Carolyn Danes is here as well, and Jennifer Stover to provide the presentation and updates to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. And it's through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm ready to present if you are. Okay. Very good. As always, for the presentation to council of the capital budgets, I think it's good to revisit our strategic plan and just remind ourselves of what that's all about, and also to revisit our long-term financial plan before we actually get into the budget itself. So just remember that the corporate strategic plan is about setting down our vision, our mission, and our values as a city, to define our strategic goals and priorities and the things that enable those things. And overall, it's about making sure that we're striving to achieve excellence in the provision of municipal services. That's really what it's all about for us, and making sure that we're providing value to our ratepayers. And so what that means is that, as stated in that last bullet point, that we always want to make sure that our plans, our strategies, any other documents that we come up with, inclusive of budgets, are aligned with that corporate strategic plan. And so that, in a sense, is our North Star. So how do we get there in terms of, or sort of in the context of the capital budget? Well, there's really a chain of alignment, and this is something, again, I'd like to always revisit when it comes time to deliberate budgets. And that is to look at how we go from the corporate strategic plan to the actual budget itself. And there's actually a whole chain of documents that's involved there. So first off is our municipal service levels. Now, those get expressed in different ways. Sometimes they're simply expressed as in it's the way we've always done it. Sometimes it's expressed in terms of an explicit policy. Sometimes it's legislated. And in other cases, it's set down by a master plan or a service review. So what we try to do as staff is always make sure that we understand what council expects in terms of a service level, and to make sure that we as a city realize that service level, whether it's through budgets or any other method. The next step that we take as a city is again, towards the capital budget, is to develop asset management plans and development charges studies. So what they do is they identify the capital needs that arise from the service levels that are set by council or that are legislated. And then the next step is to develop a long-term financial plan. And what that really does is bridge the gap between those asset management plans and those DC studies and budgets. And so in that context, the long-term financial plan really sets out the capital and the operating financial strategies that are needed to support the capital needs that are identified to support, in turn, those municipal services. So that's really the chain of alignment in terms of going from the corporate strategic plan to the budgets, because at the end of the day, it's the budgets that implement what's in all the foregoing documents, including the strategic plan. So I've already talked a little bit about the long-term financial plan, but I think it's good to go into a little bit more detail regarding that document. Some of the questions that it helps us answer is how can we develop financial strategies that will support both capital and operating needs to meet those established service levels? And how can we do that in a realistic, a prudent, but also in an affordable manner? And that's really key, that balance, being able to make sure that we're realistic, that we're building in contingency and flexibility when it comes to how we manage our finances, but at the same time making sure that we're not imposing an excessive burden on our ratepayers. And then finally, the other question that the long-term financial plan helps us answer is how do we make those short-run budget decisions with appropriate consideration for the city's long-term financial health? And that's a real challenge, right? Because there's always that trade-off of doing something now versus doing something later, or not doing something now and then having to do that same thing later at some point. So a good example would be a road that needs to be resurfaced, and if it needs to be resurfaced now and we don't do it now and we push that off, then we know that we're just simply deferring that need. Where that need doesn't go away, it's deferred. So those are the sorts of trade-offs that the long-term financial plan helps us make, or at least it gives us a context in which to make those kinds of decisions. So just before I jump into the budget itself, I thought it would be good to tell council a little bit about how we've trended versus how we planned. So in other words, how has actual performance compared to what we plan to do through the financial plan? So on the left-hand side of this slide, you'll see two tables that show what the tax increases were, both percentage-wise and dollar-wise. And the 2021 row is just a projection. Obviously, that's not an actual number, but the other rows are actual figures. And what you'll see in the very right-hand column of those two tables is the measured deficiency of those tax increases versus what was planned. And so I want to be very clear about what I mean by deficiency. I don't mean that the tax increases were necessarily wrong. It's just that when I compare them to what was planned, there's a difference. And that the entire financial plan was based on those planned tax increases. And so it does matter that there is a difference. And so what those tables do is quantify that difference for each of the years listed. And those would be the first 4 years of the financial plan. And then what the right-hand table does is it translates those into annual and cumulative impacts. So we know, for instance, in 2018, if there's about $780,000 of foregone tax revenue, that doesn't just exist in 2018, that carries over, because that's tax revenue that will not be raised in the following year or the year after that, and so on. And so that $780,000, it's embedded in all of those other rows in that annual column, and it just keeps carrying on forever. And likewise for all the other incremental deficiencies that arose. And so when you cumulate those, and so the cumulative column is simply the cumulative sum of all the deficiencies that happen each year. And you can see that grows very quickly. And the reason why it does is because when there's a current tax levy deficiency, that deficiency then is not part of the base for the next year or for the year after that, and so on. And so all the future tax increases over the next decade or so are then not incorporated in terms of those deficiencies. And so quickly, by 2030, we build up to a $50 million cumulative deficiency, meaning that's revenue that we could have had over those, let's say, 12 years, but was not available, or will not be available by that time. So I don't want it to be very scary, because of course when you accumulate over that many years, you're going to get large numbers. So it's not meant to be a scary number, but it's just meant to put into context the cumulative effect that these kinds of decisions have. This chart here, or I should say these two charts, compare again plan to actual. So the both charts are based on showing what is happening or what was planned to happen with regards to the capital reserve. So what we would refer to this in financial terms as, or financial circles, as a reserve continuity schedule. So that means it starts with an opening balance and then it ends with a closing balance. So those would be the top row and the bottom row in each table. And then all the intermediate rows are the transfers in and out of the reserve. And so you'll see in the top table, we start with, in 2018, we start with an opening balance of 0. And that is because what we've done since that time is segregate the capital reserve into really two parts. So one part is to be used to fund the surpluses and deficits of projects as they go forward. So when projects close with a surplus, the surplus flows to the capital contingency reserve, and when a project requires more funding, it takes from the capital contingency reserve. That reserve is not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is the other part of the reserve that was set aside purely for capital budgeting purposes. And so that's what I'm referring to as the capital reserve. And so it started off with a 0 balance in 2018. And it was planned to have a large withdrawal to help fund that year's capital budget. And there were some transfers in and out also planned, most notably the $25 million infusion that was financed by a large debenture, as you might recall. And the purpose behind that infusion was to tide us over the next 4 years of the plan so that we can incrementally start to raise capital expenditure to a sustainable level in order to maintain our assets, while at the same time we would incrementally raise the contribution to the capital reserve in order to sustain that long-term level of expenditure. And you'll see that by next year, what had been planned is that the level of capital budget financing from the reserve would be about $20 million, that the contribution to that reserve from the tax levy would be almost $18 million. And you can see the two converging over those years, right? You see the two converging as they should, and by 2022-23, they would converge in the plan. And then finally, at the very bottom of that top chart, you would see an uncommitted balance of about $4.5 million at the end of next year. So that's what was planned. The bottom chart shows what actually happened. So in 2018, of course, we start out with the 0 balance in the reserve because, again, it's essentially a new reserve for this purpose of capital planning. And you'll see that the closing balance is a bit lower than what we had planned, and mostly because the contribution to the reserve was lower than what was planned. And then in 2019, you see a similar process play out, whereby, again, the contribution from the tax levy is lower than what was planned, 6.9 million versus 10.1 million, if you look at that contribution from tax levy row from both tables. And then again, you see that repeated this year. And then we're projecting that to be essentially repeated again for next year. And so that's really if you just look at that one row between the two tables, that contribution from the tax levy, that's really where the pinch point has been. That's really where the source of the challenge has been in terms of trying to adhere to the plan. And so I don't want to dwell on that too much, but I did at the same time want to make sure council is at least aware of how we're comparing to our plan, how our actuals compare to our planned results so far in the long-term financial plan. So just one more chart on that, or two charts, I should say. So on this slide, the first chart takes those deficiencies in the contribution to the capital reserve, and it breaks them out into two components. So one component is the operating pressures. And we've heard about those right from the start of the plan. And when we developed the plan, we did our best to quantify them, estimate them, and to try to account for them. And one of the challenges has been is that those operating pressures continue to be higher than anticipated. And so that's been part of the challenge. The other part is the foregone tax revenue, which I showed you earlier. And when you look at the cumulative column to the far right, you'll see how they stack up against one another. They're relatively equal in their contributory effects on the contribution to the capital reserve. The bottom table shows how those deficiencies have actually translated into impacts on the reserve. And there's three ways of looking at that. The middle one, the non-tax levy transfers, I won't really look at because that's not a huge effect overall. The first and the third are. So the first one really refers to the deficiency in terms of our ability to finance the capital budget. And you see early on there wasn't a huge impact because we financed the budget just as we planned. So there was no difference there. Again in 2019, there was almost no difference. We financed the budget pretty well exactly as we planned. And then you'll start to see that change come into 2020, where we had a dramatic reduction in our ability to fund the capital budget, and then we're projecting an even larger deficiency there in our ability to fund the capital budget for 2021. And so when you accumulate those, it's about $16 million, which is actually not far off the value of all the projects that had to be deferred. That's about $18 million, right? So they're not, those two numbers aren't very far off. The last number that I would just draw your attention to is that 2021 reserve balance. And the fact that it's $4 million in brackets, meaning a negative, that tells us that the reserve is at a balance or projecting a balance of $4 million less than what should be in there at the end of 2021. And so as you can understand, that has impacts down the road, right? It lessens our ability to take on capital projects down the road. And so that bottom table, again, just gives us a sense of how the deficiencies in the contribution to the reserve are translated into real challenges on the ground. That's really what that bottom table is telling us. So I promised last slide on the long-term financial plan so far. As I hinted to already, adherence to the plan has been challenged by three main factors. So one is that the operating pressures have been larger than anticipated. We know some of them are related to winter maintenance, waste management, other sources within the operating budget. And as I also mentioned, the other challenge, which is almost of equal importance, is the difference in tax increases when we look at what was planned versus what actually happened. So over the last 3 years, including this year, the average increase has been about 3.2%, and that compares to a planned increase of 4% per year. So while those two numbers might, to some people, they might not look very different, but again, over time, those numbers are very different because there's that cumulative effect that happens. So again, when there's a tax revenue shortfall in 1 year, that has a cumulative effect into the indefinite future. And so I just want to make sure council appreciates that that is the case. And then finally, there were some capital programs or projects that were added to the plan that were previously unanticipated. One of them being the gravel rehabilitation program, which was multi-year, and I think quite successful, but again, setting aside its success and its importance, it was not a planned program. And so that was absorbed into the plan. And I would just finally state that that last point being that some projects, it meant add-in projects in that weren't planned meant that some projects got bumped out or some projects weren't completed as previously planned. So with that said about the long-term financial plan, I'll now just jump over to the tax-supported capital budget that's proposed for next year.
Adam, I think
Yep.
what we'll do, if it's okay, just, you've got a lot of information here, so why don't we see if there's any questions on the long-term financial plan? Let's deal with that if there is, and then we'll go forward into the next one, rather than trying
Yep.
to wait till the end, because it's a lot. So,
Yep.
Councillor Helmsley, you had a question on the financial plan? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Thanks for the presentation, Adam. And just a question on the reserves. On your second last slide on the bottom, it shows 2021 reserve balances, and when you go over to the cumulative, it's 3955. How much of that would be, I'm assuming that's all the reserves added together and not just one specific reserve?
No, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, it is one specific reserve. It's just referring to the capital reserve that's
So-
used to fund the budget, and it's referring to the deficiency in the balance in that reserve that's
Okay.
projected for
So
next year.
it is not as a result of the deficiency or the shortfall in the DC reserve?
Absolutely not. Totally unrelated.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for Adam on the long-term financial plan? I have a couple, if you don't mind.
Nope.
Can you go to slide 6? So, I get when council, the plan was 4%, we all knew that when we pass a budget that's a little bit less, we're bringing in less revenue, and that compounds over the length of the plan. That all makes sense to me, but when I look at your chart on slide 6 and I see, the planned contribution from tax levy of what was planned in 2019, 10,133,000. And then I look at the contribution from the tax levy was 6.8 down below, the actual contribution. I mean, we're talking about being behind in our financial plan for a lot more reasons than just council reducing the tax levy, because the tax levy went down by just over $1 million. So 1 year into the plan, we've made a contribution almost $4 million less, and I get that contribution to the tax capital reserve comes from the operating budget. So how do you, and even if you move forward across that line, like in 2020, we went from 4% to 3.5%, we're a little bit off. But there's some substantial gap growing in there on the contribution from the tax levy that is way beyond just what council's reducing in the tax levy. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So
Yes.
what else is going on there that's forcing us to lower that contribution to the capital reserve every year? So it's not it's not just council's decision to take it from 4 to 3.5%. Yes, I get that's going to put us behind, but not this much behind. So what am I
agree.
missing?
I agree, Mr. Mayor, 100%, and that's why I had this chart up as well, which follows the slide you were just referring to. So look at that top table. It decomposes that pressure on the capital reserve into those two components. One is the foregone revenue, but the other one is those operating pressures. And you'll see they're about equal importance. And so you're absolutely right. That table backs up exactly what you're suggesting, which is that this is not just about foregone tax revenue. This is about other pressures that have come into play, namely operating pressures. And in fact, they've been greater in importance than the foregone tax revenue. So you're absolutely right. It is not just council decisions. It is not just tax related. It is related also to cost pressures, namely those from the operating side.
Yeah, no, and don't
Yep,
get me wrong,
you're
please.
right.
I'm not trying to blame it on somebody else instead of council. I'm just saying, we all bought into the long-term financial plan. I'm just trying to, we seem to be falling farther and farther behind in our financial plan every year. And, it's not just because council's, tried to come up with a more affordable tax levy. And I get we've added certain projects like the beach park, which wasn't part of our capital plan, and we've done that, and I fully support that. So that's going to have an effect on it as well moving forward. To me, it looked like there was, in your operating pressures that maybe weren't accounted for. Hopefully when we get our new plan comes forward in next year, for the rest of our financial plan, there'll be some adjustments there, recognizing some of those operating pressures moving forward that probably make us a little bit more of a realistic plan. Is that?
Yeah, that's fair to say, Mr. Mayor. So you're absolutely right in your remarks. And I would just further suggest that in most cases where we did add projects that were not planned, what had to give in those cases was that simply we would defer other capital projects. So what happened is the gravel rehabilitation program came in, Bobcaygeon Beach Park came in, and for the most part, they just resulted in pushing out other capital projects. So that's why you don't see them in this chart up here. But yeah, your intuition is bang on here.
We had funding for the gravel capital plan, but I'm not going to argue with you about that today. But nice try. But what I do want, so just based on what you're showing us here, and this concerns me, but we've got some sharp people here, and I think if we make some adjustments moving forward, we're going to be okay. But when I look at this, to me, it makes it seem even more that having a catch-up year is a good thing, just to slow down what we're doing, catch up on what we can accomplish, what we're going to spend. Maybe just gives us a little bit of a breath, come forward with a new plan, and then finish it off strong. Agree?
I 100% agree, and I think everyone up here on this side of the aisle agrees with that.
Okay.
And I know you agree with that.
That's okay. No. Any other questions on the financial plan? Go ahead, Ron.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Adam. On the previous chart, I'm not sure what page it was, but it had the $25 million debenture infusion. Was that intended for operating or capital? Was it 50-50 for each? And that's being paid down, isn't it, right now through principal?
Yeah, that's correct. So through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, that is correct. There's both an operating and a capital consequence related to that debenture. The debenture was meant to, again, infuse the capital reserve to help us transition to sustainability. That's on the expenditure side, that was the intent of that debenture. But at the same time, we recognized that that was going to add a burden to our operating side, namely in the form of principal and interest payments. If you look at the interest rate we obtained for that $25 million, the annual repayment of that is about $2.9 million. And that will be retired. The treasurer can confirm this, I think, but that will be retired in about 2027, 2028. So we are making payments on that debenture just as we plan to. And it only has an effect on the operating side in terms of the cost. But on the funding side, it has an effect on capital. Does that answer the question?
Yep.
Okay.
Any further questions? Okay, go ahead. Continue on then, please.
Sure. So this chart here summarizes at a very high level what's in the proposed 2021 capital budget. You'll see, as always, the engineering side makes up the lion's share of the budget simply because that's the lion's share of the capital needs. And then you'll see how the other departments make up the rest. So what's probably most notable is the total amount at the bottom, $27.3 million, which is about 60% of what we would normally invest in a standard year. And so I think, as the CAO mentioned to you already, that one of the big reasons behind that is that we've had a lot of capital work carry over now, or will be carried over from 2020 to 2021. And that does place a sizable burden on staff resources. And in order to just make sure that we can actually complete those projects while at the same time completing all the new projects that are about to come online, it makes sense to, as the mayor just mentioned, to take a bit of a breather on capital and to just make sure we do get caught up, and then also give ourselves some time to reset that long-term financial plan. So I just wanted to put that, that total figure into context for council. This chart here is the flip side of the one we just saw. In the sense, it just shows us how the funding for the capital budget breaks down across all the various sources. And of course, you'll see, as always, the lion's share comes from the capital reserve. And then you'll see the various other sources that get us up to $27.3 million. So just a few highlights, I think, would be in order about the proposed capital budget before I turn it over to the city treasurer. Is there a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry, and this is where I'm losing grip of the budget process, and I've been here for a long time, but nowhere on that capital financing, anywhere is a tax levy. Like, nothing's funded from the tax levy anymore, so that's where we kind of lose a grip of reality. This is all funded by reserves and debentures. Where's the line that tells me the tax levy impact on the capital budget?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I understand, I think, where the councillor is coming from. It's true that before adoption of the long-term financial plan, the city did typically fund the tax-supported capital budget from a direct contribution from the tax levy. As part of the long-term financial plan, it was recommended to council, and council adopted the policy of, or at least the practice, of moving away from that model and moving towards a reserve fund-based model. And again, the idea behind that was to better stabilize how we fund the capital budget. So what this new approach enables, and this is widely used throughout the municipal sector, what this new approach enables us to do is to let the burden on the capital reserve move up and down, while at the same time keeping the tax levy relatively stable. So that's really the benefit of this approach. It's true, as the councillor said, it means that you don't see a direct line here to the tax levy, but there's certainly an indirect one through the capital reserve to the tax levy, because that's the only way that reserve is funded, is through the tax levy. So I hope that answers the question.
So, Councillor, if I can just add to that, when you look at, you got it up there? Yeah, when you look at the capital reserve, the 10 million, that's being funded through the operating tax levy. So they're paying into that, we're paying into that reserve every year. So when they finance it, it comes out of a reserve, but it's been funded through the operating budget. Same with the fleet reserve. When they, in their operating budget, they're paying every time they use a vehicle into a fleet reserve through operating, which is tax levy funded. But then when that reserve gets built up, they draw out of that reserve. So it's showing coming out of a reserve, but on the other side from operating, it's being funded through the tax levy to fill those reserves. So it's really just moving it from here to here. So if that makes any sense.
That makes perfect sense, and I understand all that, but we're doing the capital budget now, in my mind, it's a wee little mind. Now we're doing it blind because we don't know the tax levy impact of the entire budget. And we're passing a capital budget without knowing the impact on the operating budget, in my mind. What's the tax levy impact on the entire budget going into the capital budget? We haven't heard that anywhere, except if you go back to the plan, which we haven't followed for 4 years. Now we're looking at a $50 million cumulative impact down the road. So it's a bunch of numbers thrown into, like I said, my wee little mind. So what's the impact of this budget overall on the taxpayer, levy-wise?
I'll think if I can, and I think I brought a similar question up. I don't know, maybe it's Jennifer or Caroline, that we're going to get an update on December 1st on our operating pressures, so we know a little bit more of what the pressures are, what we're feeding into that capital budget. Because you're right, in the past, we've had the whole budget in front of us to see the whole effect. We're trying to get the capital done a little bit early because of the year to try and get some things, moving forward. But I believe on the 1st, we're going to have a bit of it. We won't have the operating budget, but we'll have an overview of what those budget pressures are before we start making decisions on capital. We just don't have it here today.
Thank you.
Okay? Go ahead.
Thank you. A further question. I agree with the process we're going down the road. We're putting things off and getting completed. But the other side is that as long as we keep deferring capital budgets, there's going to be the potential for added costs with breakdowns, et cetera. So is there anything in that's a buffer, or how would you say that we just have to do it through the reserves? If, you know, sudden, unexpected, cumulative, more cumulative budgets, or things happen that have to be fixed, I guess, is the short.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, absolutely right. It's really no different than how one might manage his or her household, right? There are things that are unanticipated and they happen, and you try to make sure you save a bit for a rainy day when those things do happen. If you look at the long-term financial plan holistically, so not just the first 4 years like I've showed here, but you look at the whole 10-year plan holistically, then you'll see what it was tracking for the capital reserve was for it to start off very high because of that $25 million debenture infusion, and to come down over the years where it would bottom out, the balance in the reserve would bottom out around $2 million in the middle of the plan. And then it would start to come back up, because then we would at that point start to contribute a little bit more to the reserve than what we would use. And that would start to build up the reserve to a point of maybe $10 or $12 million towards the end of the plan, so that then we do have that buffer, finally, for exactly the things that you're referring to. When things break unexpectedly, or council has a new initiative like a Bob Cajun Beach Park and the council wants to bring that forward, great. Or a new medical center in Cobeconk, you want to bring that forward, great, we have the money to do that. That was really where the motivation was for bringing that capital reserve balance up to something like $10 or $12 million. That would be uncommitted. And that's the key here. It would be uncommitted funds in the sense that they're available to look after those kinds of things that are unanticipated, because we know you can plan for everything until you're blue in the face, but there's always going to be that unanticipated thing that comes along, and you want to be prepared for it. The challenge with our plan was that we had to recognize that we couldn't instantaneously build up that reserve. It was going to take time to do it. And so we reflected that in the plan, and part of the challenge has been is that some of those pressures, those unanticipated pressures, came forward before we were able to build up that reserve. And that's been a bit of the timing challenge. But you're absolutely right that in an ideal situation, we would be prepared to take on almost anything that could come along, like, let's say, an HVAC system that fails before it should.
Oh,
as
we'll
an
talk
example.
about that one later.
I know.
Don't get me started on that one. Yeah, one step at a time. So
Yeah.
but the new I got you, Councillor Dunn. The new financial strategy that's coming, or the updated strategy that's coming forward, my understanding will include debenture strategy, a reserve strategy, so that we'll have a little bit more of just what you're asking for, a bit of a longer term strategy in all the facets of the financing, correct?
Correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay,
Yes.
Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think part of the problem is just labeling. And I'm going to go back to 8 years ago when we did budgets, and we're going to do project XYZ, and we look at it and we see, 5% is being funded by debentures, 10% by development charges, and everything else is by tax levy. And when we walked into it saying, boy, we want that project, and all of a sudden we saw 85% of it was being funded by the tax levy, we sort of backed away from it, and it encouraged us to do so. Now with everything being funded from the capital reserve, which is tax levy, we've lost track of some of that, and we really have to concentrate. When we see that word tax levy, strike it out, capital reserve, strike the word capital reserve out and say tax levy, because that's what it is. And I think we lose track of that every now and again, because, reserve, we've already saved the money. And what that really means is we're going to borrow the money from our taxes to pay for it. So it's just a comment.
Yeah, no, and I don't disagree, and I think we've had the conversation before about trying to separate those reserves. So the capital reserve, it used to be money we had for capital projects that aren't anticipated. It was a reserve. It's not really, it's a funding reserve more than a capital reserve, you know, that I think we need to sort of separate that out, and so that, just what you're saying, it's tax levy for projects. It's not extra money that we have, you know, sitting aside for a rainy day. Those are two totally separate things. And I think the way we've wording it has been a little bit confusing, I know for me. So just to your point, thanks. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Looks like I'm right where I'm supposed to be. Great, so I've already talked about the first bullet point there about the total amount of investment that we're planning to undertake. The second bullet point I've talked about briefly, but I'll just note that the rough value of all those capital projects that are carrying over to next year is $25 million, so certainly a substantial amount, and of course, that's why we're very cognizant about the impact on staff resources that has. As council is aware, it gave early start approval to the next phase of downtown Lindsay reconstruction for an investment of about $6.8 million. And that would be for Kent Street from William Street to Victoria Avenue, and Cambridge Street from Russell Street to Peel Street. An investment of $1.5 million to replace the Mill Pond Bridge in Omemee, for which there was an environmental assessment done recently. One final investment of $500,000 to finish off the Bob Cajun Library relocation and expansion. And as I showed in one of the tables on an earlier slide, $9.1 million in terms of a tax levy contribution to the capital reserve. So again, quite a bit lower than what we had aimed for. And that's frozen at the 2020 level. And an uncommitted balance forecasted for the capital reserve at the end of 2021 of about $500,000, and that would compare to $4.5 million that we had hoped would be there at the end of next year. And to help answer one of the councillor's questions, staff is still targeting roughly 3% tax levy increase as compared to the 4% that's in the long-term financial plan. And as I think the mayor stated, that number would be finalized when the operating budget is adopted. So I think with that, Mr. Mayor, I've now bumped up against the city treasurer's part, so I'll let her take it from here.
Any questions for Adam before he leaves? Go ahead, Councillor.
Yeah, the contribution to capital. So we just heard at the beginning of your presentation that we're only putting in about 60% of the capital because we have such a backlog. So we're going to do 60% of our usual capital budget, and we're going to finish stuff we had to delay until next year from this year. So why is our contribution only 9.1 million? Why aren't we using that other 40% of capital reserve funding? What happened to it? Where'd the 40% go?
Understood. So through you, Mr. Mayor, perhaps I could clarify. So when I use the 60% figure, what I was referring to is the level of investment, meaning the level of expenditure is 27.3 million as opposed to, say, 45 million. That's where that 60% figure comes from. So that's on the expenditure side, not the funding side. The funding side is regarding the capital budget. The capital reserve is about $10.7 million to support the budget, and the contribution is about $9.1 million. So what that does mean is that we're depleting that reserve a little bit more this year, coming up.
Okay.
Well, I thank you for that answer, but I don't want to.
No problem.
Any other? Councillor Ashmore?
Just a question through you to Adam. Could you explain the early start program just briefly? I know it's beneficial, but how much do we actually save out of that? And I didn't see it in the previous slide, how much the savings are from that program, early start.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. That's a good question. I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but I do understand, based on what I heard, that the tender for the next phase of downtown Lindsay came in roughly $1 million lower than what was anticipated. Now, to keep that number in perspective, probably about half of it is water, wastewater related, so therefore not related to tax-supported capital. But what it does go to show is that there is a substantial advantage typically to going with an early start for certain projects like this one. I think in the case of this particular project, we realized even more savings than we typically would because of how COVID has disrupted the market. And our sense is that contractors, at least at this time, are very hungry. They're more hungry than usual to set up their work for the next year, and I think that was reflected in the pricing that we received. And we've seen similar savings coming in for the other early start projects that were approved as well. So I think that's encouraging.
And I'll just add, it's a cost savings in certain tenders, but it's also a work schedule. I know the Lindsay downtown, they want to start the project in January. Obviously, if the budget doesn't get passed till December, tenders go out, they're not going to have it in time to start when they want to start it. Sometimes when we need a plow truck for next winter, it takes 9 months to build. So if we don't get an early start on it, we're not going to have it for next winter. So it's not just a cost savings, but sometimes it's a build or a manufacturing or a work plan scheduling helps a lot in that way too.
So it doesn't apply just to infrastructure, it applies to fleet, for example?
It can apply to anything where there's an advantage into council, whether it's schedule-wise or cost-wise. If there's an advantage to getting an early start and council's willing to commit to it early, then we'll certainly try to take advantage of it on one side or the other. If we're not in a position financially to do it, or we don't want to go there, we don't have to, but then it just, it delays things down the road. Okay? Any other? Okay.
You're up.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here to see everyone's smiling faces. I'm going to do the difficult task of explaining debt in the city as well as the reserve. Turn it off. Incorporating into it that we do have to look at this for the long-term financial plan, because obviously debt and reserves form a big part of financing the capital budget. So in this slide, I've put up the various levels or various categories of debt that we have, as well as putting on them our limits that we have set, council has set. Our tax levy limit has always been $25 million, and we are, at the end of 2020, we're at 22.5. Now, there is a debenture currently out right now. We're supposed to be finalizing it for receipt December the 1st. So I have included that debenture in here, and I just wanted to tell you as well the rates that we got on that debenture for the 10-year projects that we went out for, 1.55%, and for the 20-year, 2.15%. So the rates were very favorable. So we had a lot of projects kind of in the backlog that hadn't completed, so we decided to move ahead with a debenture for December for that. So I just wanted to verify that this is why every category seems to have an increase, is that we have gone out for new debt. So then we have our tax that everyone calls the special debt. And council has approved 41.3 million. Now it's not a limit per se, but there has been approvals for that much. And currently there are a few that we haven't gone out for because the project hasn't completed. So our level of that is 26.2 million. Now we have our DC debt, which is our DC debit debt that I talk to you quite often about. So this is where council has approved going forward with growth prior to growth being here. So we just went out for approximately 8.5 million to offset some debits in that reserve, and I'll talk about that later in the presentation. Then our water and wastewater debt is at 49.5 million and currently sits at 42.6 million. KLH debt, now that's our housing debt for the KLH Corporation, and it's sitting at 10.6 million, but as everyone knows, KLH is currently in a development phase of new properties, so they require a limit as well, and so that will be part of the financial plan. Our Northwest Trunk debt is really not our debt, it's the developer's debt, so any payments and interest that is incurred on this debt is added to the amounts owing from the Northwest Trunk Development Group. and then we have our tile drain, which is our flow-through. So you've seen this a lot. I show it every time I present financial statements, but I wanted to show the next slide that shows, Adam, where do you? The next slide that shows the tax levy debt limit, and to show how long ago we set that limit. 2005, we came forward with a limit of 21 million on the debt. And yes, I was here in 2005, so I remember that report. And then in 2009 and 2015, we increased it 2 million each year to have the $25 million limit that we have now. So now we come to this special debenture debt, which in 2014, we had proposed to fund our Honeywell project through a special debenture. The 10-year financial plan was done. 68 Lindsay Street, we're just completing that debenture actually now to bring it up to the 8.7 million. And then we have the Bob Cajun Beach Park, the Ops Arena. Now that's on the agenda for today, so that will probably be going away depending on what council approves. And then St. Mary's Bridge was our final one that we council approved for 0.5 million. So this indicates to me that we're doing all these special debentures, that it really is time to maybe look at that self-imposed limit to determine if that is really 25 million is the right amount. So that will be explored as we look at the capital budget going forward and any other invest or funding that we can find. Okay, so then the next one.
Before we move on.
Yeah.
On the ops debt that's anticipated that may go away, is that included in that, in the 26, or is that?
It's in the special debenture of 1.9 million
That's
right now.
included.
It's a special debenture. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Councillor Dunn?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Madam Treasurer, when I think of finances, I always think of the house.
Yes, and I'm coming to that.
No, but if I've got a bunch of credit card debt, you know, I owe Royal Bank this and yada, 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 and a bunch of other ones. And I decide I'm going to consolidate my debts and bring them all into one little pot, and I'm going to pay that off over a long term. All of a sudden, I get this feeling in my heart that, geez, I got all those empty credit cards, I can go up and run them up again. So I'm concerned with the comment that we should be, we should possibly look at changing our debt limit, because in my world, that's an open invitation just to start all over again. Do you want to
Sure.
comment on that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, through the councillor. I'm not saying that it's going to go up. I'm just saying we need to look at it to determine whether or not, you know, back in 2005, the landscape looked a lot different. We had maybe more provincial grants being offered, or, you know, that we could access every year. So I'm just not sure if 25 million is the proper amount. These special debentures, it indicates to me that we're having to do all these special debentures because we simply don't have room in that 25 million to offset the amounts. In fact, in the 2021 capital budget, we're only using 1.1 million in debenture for tax levy because we're starting to bump up against that 25 million. Definitely not saying that that is something that may go up, it may go down. We just have to look at the whole plan. And I understand your concern.
I completely and totally doubt it'll ever go down.
But I do think that people look at debt and they think it's bad, because personally you don't want to have debt, right? And if you look at my next slide, I'm looking at the debt as a percentage of our assets.
Okay, because
So-
back when I had
Yeah.
a job, I was, and I wanted to spend more money, I earned more money. I went out and I
Yes.
worked more overtime and et cetera to make more money. I recognize the way that we make money here is to increase taxes. So I'm always looking for a balance between debt and
Definitely.
increasing taxes. And sometimes I'm in favor of increasing taxes rather than increasing our debt. That's
Yeah.
the-
Yep,
Thank
for
you.
sure. So here we have, at the city, we have, as the manager of assets has told us, we have $3.2 billion. That is our fair market value of all our assets, buildings, vehicles, land, et cetera. And our total debt right at the end of 2020, and say you add on even the 1.1 million that we're going to go use in the 2021 budget, we have, let's say, $136 million in debt. So debt as a percentage of the fair market value is 4.25%. So for every $4.25 of debt you have $100 of assets. So to put that in perspective, so that you look at it as through a personal lens, because, you know, working here at the city, you don't deal, we're a massive organization. $3.2 billion in assets is a huge amount of money. So if you look at a typical household in the city of Kawartha Lakes, I did ask the economic development manager what an average price of a home is in the city of Kawartha Lakes today, and she told me $475,000. So if you take that and you say 4.25% of that value I have in debt, that means I have $20,000 in debt on that property. So that puts it in a little bit more perspective as you think of it as a personal situation. 20,000 is not a high number when you put it down into the price of a home. So then, as you've heard me talk about every year when I come for our financial statement presentation, we have an annual repayment limit with the Ministry of Finance. So right now, with 2020, with all of our new debt in, we have $16.7 million in debt, principal and interest payments per year. We can have, according to our annual repayment limit, 43.7 in debt, principal, and interest payments. That doesn't necessarily tell us we can how much debt we can have. It just says those are the payments we can have. And I think it's similar to when you go to a bank and they say, I'm not sure what it is anymore, 32% of your income can be debt related or debt and tax related. It's kind of similar to that. And so our remaining annual repayment limit is $27 million. And as I've said, it's a huge number if you look at a 3% interest rate, which is high today, because as I told you, 1.55 and 2.15 were our amounts for 10 and 20 years. We have a remaining debt room of $313 million to $526 million. And that does not mean I am saying we need to go out for $313 million in debt. I'm just saying, just trying to give you a perspective of how much room that leaves us with. So our debt servicing cost of that, so that's, you take your total debt principal and interest and you divide it into your total revenue. Our total revenue for the city is over $233 million. And so our debt servicing cost is 7.1%. So I have said that I do get concerned around the 7.5% mark. So we are kind of bumping up into that, but you've got to understand that some of that debt that is in the listing that I showed you when I started this has revenue offsets against it, which I haven't factored into this 7.1%. So we have DC revenue coming in to offset the DC debt. We have housing grants coming in to offset the housing debt. And we have our drain grants, which is really just a flow through. So any payments we make on them are totally offset by a grant from the ministry. And Northwest Trunk as well for the $10 million. Thanks, Adam. So for comparative purpose, if we use the CKL median household income, which is around $80,000, that equates to a monthly mortgage payment of approximately $475 a month. I don't think I've ever had that low of a mortgage payment, so it just puts it in perspective that it's not, I think we tend to think of ourselves thinking we have that much debt, and it's not as scary when you put it in perspective into a personal situation, I think. So now we're going to go on to reserves.
Let's just see if there's any questions on the debt before you just flip over to reserves. Are we good? I don't want to say good, but Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you to the deputy. I had a question a while ago about the city not having a credit rating. I know we have really low interest rates right now, but we don't have a credit rating. Is that correct?
Through you, yes, we do not have a credit rating, and I do believe that we did do a report on that a few years ago, and we looked into the cost of getting a credit rating, and compounded with the fact that when I talk to other municipalities who have credit ratings, they're not even using their credit rating because the IO, the Infrastructure Ontario rates are so low. And the cost of getting a credit rating and maintaining a credit rating was a little excessive, and it wasn't going to give us the savings that we wanted. If we just went with IO, it wouldn't, I think we'd probably get around the same as, or probably more of a higher interest rate on our debt. So I do have that as an outstanding report, Ron, that I do have to get to you. So I will do that investigation.
Thank you.
Okay?
So just on the debt, I mean, and this is kind of my opinion, you know, when we talk about the debt and the special debentures that we've taken out on a few different things, take out the financial plan, I think it's important to mention that the difference in those two debts, you know, the 25 million debt limit that we have, it never gets paid down. I mean, every year we pay a principal and interest, but every year we use what we've paid off in our budget to fund projects,
Yes.
right? So it stays at, you know,
Yes.
it varies a little bit, but it's not every year, whereas the special projects that we've debentured, you know, the Beach Park, the St. Mary's Bridge, 68 Lindsay Street, I mean, those are over a fixed term and we want them paid off in 10 years, right? So it, you know, I know that puts more pressure on our operating budget because there's a principal and interest, but I certainly have a bigger comfort level with that debt as opposed to increasing the 25 million limit, knowing that it's just going to stay there. Whatever we bump that to, we're going to utilize that money, and then it's never going to come down unless we start putting a strategy together to pay off so much each year, which is going to take more money out of our operating budget, right?
Right.
So I guess when you come forward with a long-term debt strategy, something to keep in mind that, you know, they're, and I'm just saying for me, I won't speak for the rest of council, but when I get a debt, and you know, it's like a mortgage, I take my debt, but I know I'm paying it off, there's a greater comfort in that than just a credit line that's just sitting there, and all I pay is interest, and it never gets paid off. So, you know, when we talk about increasing debt or utilizing debt, I think that's what I think has been the appetite for some of these special projects where we're maybe not afraid to incorporate a little bit more debt, but we want to know that it's going to get paid off at some point. And that's sort of, you know, why you're seeing a little bit of an increase in that rather than just raising our debt limit. So that's
No,
just my thought.
totally understandable, and I tend to agree with you because, as you're right, they don't generate new debt room, those special debentures. It just seems to be coming up more and more, so it just gives me an indication that something's just not right. Like we have maybe, you know, too much capital to do,
Yeah.
or we don't have, you know, we just don't have enough funding to do the capital.
Yeah, showing the
budget.
pressures that are there,
The
and we don't really
pressures,
have
for
enough
sure.
funding to do them other than taking out a special debt to do
Yep.
it, right? So,
Yep, for
yeah,
sure.
no, I agree.
Yep.
Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
One last question through you to Jennifer. You had mentioned we have over $3 billion worth of assets. Like, what is the program, you'd mentioned, I think you mentioned the name there, Mr. Mayor, like the program that or the study that we're doing that would look at some assets, like, for example, quarries. I'll just give that as an asset, as an example. Like, we have so much money tied up in real estate. Could we not look at reducing our debt that way or liquidating some of these land assets that I'm not talking parks and things like that, just things like quarries. I'll give that as a good example. Like, why aren't we really seriously looking at that, like, right now, instead of just putting it off for another study down the road? Like, this is the time that we need to sell these assets because they're worth so much to reduce our debt and our debt servicing right now.
Through you to the councillor, I think I might have to defer to the CAO on that. I'm not sure of the, sorry about that. I'm not sure of the plans for sale of assets.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I mean, we did a general inventory on all of our land holdings, and as you may recall, we looked at a 10-year strategy and we targeted about $6 million in land sales, and we costed that based on what we thought was sort of truly surplus lands that just were extremely underutilized, still need to go through a process to do that. What we did find, though, is, and that number probably sounds low relative to maybe what we would be trying to accomplish to bring the debt down, but the reality is that I mean, those high value lands very often are critical public lands as well. Now, having said that, there are some areas like the pits and quarries in particular. I know that's one that we want to put our attention to, maybe not so much to sell off as operations, but to look at maximizing the business case out of them so we get public return. At this point, we're not proposing in our work plan to look any deeper than the ones that we already exposed, and we're on that track to meet that $6 million sort of net revenue target over the life of that previous plan.
Okay, so we're going to move on to reserves for 2021. I've projected where we're going to be. Now, this has a bit of operating transfers in. Obviously, we're not done completing the 2021 operating budget, so that might change as well. But it does have all of the activity in the capital budget currently, as well as in the water and wastewater budget, which we will be talking about in 2021 as well. So we do have transfers to Councillor Yo's point. There are various transfers in to these reserves through the operating budget. So infrastructure encompasses all of our asset-related reserves. So fleet would be in there, a capital reserve would be in there, the capital contingency reserve would be in there. I believe there's the water and sewer infrastructure reserves are all in that one as well. But they all contribute money through their operating budgets into those reserves. So as Adam stated, 9.1 million is going into the capital reserve that he uses for the 2021 budget. That has not increased from 2020. So we did not project an increase in that number. It is 9.1, the same as 2020. Now the fleet reserve is a self-balancing transfer where there are expenses put into each department who uses fleet's budget, and then a transfer to reserve. That money is recorded as revenue in fleet, and then a transfer to the capital fleet reserve goes through. And I think there's 3.2 million in the operating budget, as well as another 1.3 million from the fire that go into that fleet reserve. And then water and sewer are around 1.7 and 1.5 from their user budgets. But I think what I'll do is I'll do a slide for the December 1st meeting so that you can see all of the tax levy amounts and water and wastewater amounts that go into that, to these reserves. So the working capital reserve is on here at 2.8 million, and we have there is a resolution on this agenda as well to use that money. I'm not going to get into that discussion, but we will we'll discuss that when the report comes up. So I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of that. The development charge line is 28 million at the end of 20 and 30 million at the end of 2021. Again, you can see we're projecting about 3 million in development charge revenue for the year, as well as Adam has not used the development charge reserve extensively in the 2021 capital budget, just because we know that that balance is high, but it's because council has decided to prepare for growth before growth comes. So not that that's a bad thing, but it's just I'll get into that discussion here in a bit. So, Adam? So then to put this in perspective again, so we're looking at kind of your savings account. Reserves are like savings accounts. You put them away for a rainy day to, offset various expenditures, unexpected expenditures that might come up. So again, we're looking at our fair market value of the city assets of 3.2 billion. Our capital related reserves are 23.8, and we've talked that we need to get that number up. So we hope to have focus of that in the financial plan that's coming forward in 2021. So our reserves, as a percentage of that asset, is less than 1%. So for comparative purposes, again, if you wanted to look at the value of that home of $475,000, that would mean you would have $3,500 in savings for the maintenance of that home. So I'm sure there's people that have less than that for the savings for unexpected things or capital improvements that they want to do for their home, but I think I'd want to see that number a little bit higher. Okay, and then I want to talk about the development charge reserve. So we have plus or minus $30 million deficit in that reserve. Now, we are included in our debenture that we're getting in shortly here, December 1st, is 8.5 million, so that would bring that down to $22 million. And the reason why we're not debenturing for the full amount is because you can, you have an obligatory fund, which development charge reserve is. So when you say you're going to spend $10.2 million in development charges, for example, on that Lindsay water pollution control plant, but you only spend $2,000 in that project, the rest of that money goes back into the reserve. So at the end of the year, it will come back into the reserve, and it will come back to a positive balance, and then in 2021, we'll bring it out again. So it's just moving the money around, essentially. I just wanted to make you aware that if we finished all of the capital projects where development charges come out, we would have $31 million in a deficit in the DC reserve at the end of the year. So, but that is your conscious decision and staff's decision to place the infrastructure prior to growth coming. And we do see growth coming. So to put that in perspective, the 31 million, if we looked at the Lindsay development charge rates, I think they're around 26,000, we would have to build 1,200 homes in order to bring that DC reserve back to zero and collect that 26,000 on all those homes. We tend to average about 250 homes per year, so you would take probably about 5 years to recover that 200. If we do 250 homes, it would take about 5 years to recover that 30 million. So I know that there are, lots of buildings in the works. So I know that there was a big one that just came through now. So, and that the 250 doesn't include all those deferred development charges that we have either. So, it's not a bad thing that we built the growth before, or built the projects before the growth came, because we're seeing that growth now. We're seeing lots of construction around Lindsay. So, and that concludes what I wanted to tell you about the debt and the reserves, and hopefully we'll be able to give you a better update once the financial plan becomes more solid.
Thank you. Any questions on the reserves? So I have one.
Okay.
So I just, can you put slide 18 up? I find it, when we talk about reserves, and I guess to Councillor Dunn's point, you go back to your house, right?
Yeah.
So we don't have as much reserves compared to our assets, and we don't have a lot of debt
No.
compared to our assets. But, is it good business to have a whole lot of reserves and a whole lot of debt capacity, just from a business perspective? It's like if I have a lot of equity in my house, or a big credit line and my house is paid off, but I don't have any savings, but I know if something happens, I've got the capacity to fix it. If I am mortgaged out on my house and I don't have any savings and something goes wrong, I'm in trouble. But we seem to be in a good situation on both. So when you say we want to get our reserves up, do we take into account the debt capacity we have for that rainy day, which, if something happened, we're not in trouble by any means, because we've got a lot of emergency capacity if we need it. So, is it good business to have both, lots of debt capacity and lots of reserves? I think it's nice, but is it good business from because there's a cost to that, right? There's a cost to our taxpayers for that. So does that make sense?
Oh, definitely. We're not in bad shape by any means. The ministry's not knocking at our door, number one. And they certainly would be telling us they're more concerned if our debt was getting too high. And they recognize it's in the median risk range, and they have talked to us about it, but it's just simply, we just want you to be aware that that's what's happening. It's nothing that they're, really concerned about. But I do think that if you look at most of the other municipalities in the area, their reserves are a lot higher than what ours are. I don't think that that's a good level of savings for the amount of infrastructure that we have to maintain.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? Okay.
So I'm going to conclude the presentation, but I'll maybe just add to the point that you just raised, Mayor Letham, and that is that the city really isn't, if you look at our reserves, we're not growing our reserves. We're not creating additional savings. And to Councillor Yo's point, the money that we're infusing into the reserves specifically to manage our capital program, we're spending it as fast as we're putting it in there. And so I think that's the treasurer's point of we need to start to build a bit more reserves because we know there's capital pressures and we want to be able to do more capital program every year, but we simply don't have the funding available to do it right now without depleting the reserves that are there entirely. But I do agree with you that there is a balance between reserves and debt, and that is entirely what we're hoping to do with the debt and reserve strategy that we're going to come forward with as part of the long-range financial plan, is put some parameters around that so that council has that comfort level.
But I'm not talking about the capital reserve to fund capital projects. I'm talking about like that rainy day reserve, you know? Is it when we have our reserve strategy, and I think at the end of the plan you wanted that, I don't remember, 10 million or something, you know, it's gonna go down, then we're gonna have 10 million there of extra funding, but we're now, you know, maintaining our capital assets at where we want them. We're funding them every year at where we want them, but we have 10 million extra dollars. And I guess what I'm trying to sort of dig into a bit is, you know, is how do we know what that number should be? You know, if we're maxed out on our debt, then obviously that number should be high because we don't have the capacity over here. But I'm not worried where our debt is, but if we have lots of debt capacity, you know, does it give us some flexibility in that rainy day reserve that maybe, you know, we don't need to have it so high? You're right. I mean, it's part of the strategy, I guess, going forward. I guess I just wondered if it, you know, are we looking at both sides of the picture from a business perspective? Because whether we're funding the debt or we're funding the reserve, it's taxpayers, right? It's that pressure. So, you know, we want to have a good balanced pressure coming forward. And I don't even know if I'm making any sense, but you know, it's just taking them both. It's not just we want to have lots of reserve. Of course, we all want to have lots of reserve, but you know, I mean, I don't want to have $100,000 in my bank account, have my house paid off, and you know, well, I do, but and I don't, but that would be cool. But you know, wouldn't that be? It's from a business perspective. You know, we're trying to maximize our business model, and there's got to be a good balance there somewhere. And I'm not sure where it is. So
No, so
Just a
completely
comment.
agree with you. And that is really why we're looking at this debt strategy, reserve strategy, looking at what are our capital and operating needs long-term to understand what that right mix is between building reserves and taking on debt and making sure that we're sort of maximizing the city's tax revenue that's coming in, if that makes sense.
thank you, Councillor Dunn. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, where I come from, money that I'm not putting into debt, I can be putting into reserves. So I'm all in favor of building reserves. Not so much increasing debt. I think I'm just brought up in a world where debt's a bad thing. The more debt we have, the more pressure we put on our taxpayers. The more debt we have, of course, as already mentioned, the less flexibility we have. Because that debt's always, that debt room is always available to us. So certainly I agree with the thought of building reserves. But I do get scared by debt because we're very proud of the 1.5% and 2% interest rates we enjoy now. I remember the 18% interest rates where people were selling their houses because they couldn't afford to stay in them, and then they were buying their house back at a lower cost. And I never want to go down that road, and I certainly don't want to take people that are in my ward and my city. I don't want to take them down that road either. So I'm really nervous about increasing debt, and of course I say that every time it comes up, so I'll just leave it there.
Councillor Elmsley.
Yeah, I'll be the yang to Councillor Dunn's yin. I don't like to see us charge the taxpayer and put money into reserves, because I don't think that's what they pay taxes for. I think they pay taxes for services. So when we get a windfall and put money into reserves, I think it's the taxpayer that's putting the money into the reserve. So I think we do a really good job with our budgeting, because we're usually within 1.5% of what we budgeted, which I think is about as good as you can get. So I think growing our reserves slowly and having them, maybe at the 1.5% level might be advisable, but I don't like to see them overly large.
Thank you.
Yes, so just to respond to that, I think what we'll look to do with the reserve strategy is to really understand what are our cost pressures over a 10-year window, as an example, and ensure that the revenue that we're generating in that the reserves we're building in that 10 years will cover those 10-year costs, so that we're not putting pressure on taxpayers today to pay for something necessarily that's going to fail 40 years from now, but making sure that there's some stability in the tax rate, that we've got the appropriate amount of reserves, that we're not taking on inordinate amounts of debt, and really just trying to find that nice balance that can keep everybody happy. On the debt side, what the strategy will more look to do is to understand, is that $25 million the right number? And then when it comes to special debentures, sort of putting some parameters around what do we want to use special debentures for? Do we want to look at allocating our debt between the various buckets, if you will? So our capital program versus the Housing Corp's capital program versus water and wastewater. Just there's those competing needs, and if we're not looking at the organization as a whole, we could run into problems down the road. And so really just trying to make sure we're taking a step back and understand what that right mix between reserves and debt is for the organization long term. So that's really the intent of that.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead with
So,
your,
talking about next steps, I think we've covered the reserve and debt strategy. We don't need to talk about that anymore. But the long-term financial plan will also look, if you recall, the financial plan currently has our tax rate at 4% for a number of years, and then it steps down to 3 or 2.5, and then it steps down again. We'll look to have something that's stable. So the same tax levy increase across the board for the full term of the plan. Hopefully, we're hoping to come in around 3%, because that seems to be something that both council and the residents are okay with at this point. And so we'll look to do that. We'll look to improve the operating strategy and to understand that mix between capital and operating. And this comes back to the point that Councillor Yeo raised earlier. Right now, we put in a tax levy increase of 3% or 3.5%. We don't really dissect how much of that's going towards our capital program and the ability to grow our capital program, and how much of that's being funded into operating. And so we still will come in with probably a one tax rate, but there'll be a better understanding within the plan about how much of that's being allocated to operating versus capital, so that we don't run into the same problem that we've had in the first 4 years, where operating pressures have been way above what we thought, and all of that tax levy pressure was being pushed over to operating, and very little of it was going to grow the capital program. So we'll look to separate that. We'll revisit service levels where appropriate, and comes to Councillor Ashmore's point of, are there things we need to be doing differently in the organization to help lessen those burdens on the tax levy? The reserve strategy we've talked about, and so our goal, the three of us here, is to have that long-term financial plan in front of council sometime in Q2. There's a lot of heavy lifting that needs to happen in order for us to get there, but I think collectively we're committed to make that happen. So next slide. And so then finally, just next steps for the budget. So on November the 6th, we distributed the capital budget both in electronic form to council and members of the public, and certainly distributed a physical copy to all of council. Today we're here to give you that overview of the capital program. December 5th, we will deliberate the capital budget and seek approval. At that meeting as well, we'll give you an overview of what the operating budget looks like and where the tax levy pressures are. And just to clarify, the budget that you have in front of us for capital is assuming that 0% of the tax levy for 2021 will be applied to capital. And so you'll recall the CAO spoke at a previous meeting about, this is our capital program based on what we think we can accommodate today. In the new year, in Q1 of 2021, when we're deliberating the budget, we'll know what our year end looks like. We'll have some decisions on what we want to do with the 2019 surplus, what's happened with 2020 if there's a surplus, and there may be an opportunity at that point to allocate more money out of the or the operating budget into capital and revisit the capital program. But for right now, we're assuming zero, so that there's no pressure on the tax levy for this budget that you have in front of you. December 11th, we will have the physical budget book that you're used to seeing available for the operating budget, water and wastewater, and special projects. And then in Q1 of 2021, we'll look to have the department overviews of their budget, the agencies, boards, and committees will be able to present their budget, and then finally we'll have the deliberation of those three budgets, and move on to our 2021 business.
That's it? Thank you. That was a great discussion. Any questions for Director Stover? So on when you say December 1st, we're going to have a bit of an overview on some of our grants and funds and stuff for 2020. Sorry. One of the grants that's come forward from the province is that COVID relief fund. It's a new $392,000 we've been allocated. Will we get an update on that, and if there's where that can be allocated if necessary, or what options will be available then? So will that be part of it?
We sure can.
Any other questions? So let's get a motion to receive the presentation. Councillor O'Reilly and Seymour Fagan, any last questions? All in favor? That's passed. So let's take a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll deal with the report. I know CAO is going to give us an overview on the report, and then we'll go from there. So let's take a quick 5 minutes. Okay, we're good. Call the meeting back to order. We'll do 6.1.1, which is the proposed 2021 tax support capital budget. I believe Ron Taylor's going to give us a walkthrough on our budget document. Go ahead, sir.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. So the report that is on the agenda really, for the most part, summarizes what you just heard in terms of the presentation, in terms of some of the themes and where we're heading into this budget year. So again, reiterates the presentation, some of the highlights. It commits to the long-term financial plan overhaul that we want to bring to you in Q2 of 2021 for a whole bunch of reasons that we just described in the presentation. So in this year, I opened up sort of with a similar comment, but in this coming capital program year, what are we really recommending, or what is in front of you? And I think there's a couple of key points. One is, this is a year for us to catch up. We want to complete the work. We're in. We've committed to it. There's a lot of work that was funded in this calendar year. Let's put our resources collectively to finish what we started. Doesn't negate, and you heard there, a little over $27 million of new investment in our capital. We don't want to slow down either. We need to stay, we want to get ahead. We want to keep going and investing in that critical capital that's just needed year over year for a whole bunch of reasons. You're going to see in this budget, I think, at least from our perspective, one of the key areas where we're trying to focus on is in those sort of capital areas that are going to assist with community recovery. And so you'll see there's a lot of investment that has been maintained in roads, for example. We want to keep a focus on that. We need to catch up on the quality of the roads. And then there's a number of other enhancements or improvements that you'll see in this capital budget, and you'll see more in the operating budget in Q1 as well. But that sort of whole focus on accelerating recovery is top of mind. And before I go through the budget package, I just think it's really important that we don't minimize the impact of the pandemic in the immediate term for some of our operations and projects. And it was mentioned, this program is really trying to leverage and utilize the resources that we have as we know them today. And it's not just numbers, it's not just staffing numbers, it's also health and safety orders, constraints, different ways that we have to do business, how we do business. So some of it is bringing in seasonal staffing support. Some of it is things like retrofits to our spaces in order to accommodate either the public. You know, there will be continued reduced occupancies in many of our spaces. Our revenues that we have enjoyed pre-pandemic, we've updated you in 2020 what the impact is, but we're still well into this, and so it's hard to predict, but we're assuming that we're going to also forego some revenues in 2021 as well. We just have to be prudent. Even some of the ways that we do business, so whether we're investing in some technology in order to keep our service levels where they are, there's a premium cost for that, but between the two budgets, operating and capital, quite confident that we'll be able to meet those core services as well. The other sort of interesting thing is demand, public demand for our services as well. Some of them are forced based on orders, so we've had to continue to shut down certain spaces, buildings, and services. Some we've minimized. Others we've opened, but the demand has still been slow and steady because of the public's concern for safety and use of some of these facilities. So it's an interesting, one of the slides mentioned us revisiting our service levels. I think that it would apply both short term and then also in the long term. What are we learning in terms of the public demand for some of these services? So if I could, Mr. Mayor, I wanted to walk you through, not page by page, line by line today, of the budget document you have, but I did want to walk you through the different elements, if that's okay. Hopefully everybody has their binders or are looking at the Appendix A to the report, which is the same document electronically. And really, just so make it clear for today, the intent, as we see it today, Mr. Mayor, would be to present you just the overall sort of financial position, the processes that we're heading into. We wanted to present to you specifically the 2021 capital budget, but present it through you to the public. Because as I mentioned before, originally we were looking at the new year in starting the process and deliberations for capital. We've accelerated that by almost 3 months, but we think it's really important that this early touch point, it allows for that 30 days for the draft budget to be out in the public realm, so that if there's any interest or the public wanted to comment or present to you or correspond, they have that opportunity after hearing today, but up to December 1st. And we wanted, I think it's important today, you said it once already, but really what we're looking for as staff going into December 1st is any clarity that you can provide, any direction, any recommendations or specific decision units that you would like us to do some additional work on to bring forward to you so that you can deliberate the capital budget properly on December 1st. And whether it's formal or just general information as well, anything that you can highlight that we can bring forward to you on that date as well would be helpful. I should have mentioned too that on December 1st, we will have the other departments and program areas represented here at the meeting, so that if you have any questions about any of the capital portfolios, they're the experts, so they'll certainly answer any questions on very specific projects and recommendations. So in our binder, if you go to page 4, is really the first section, and again, I'm not going to go line by line, but I'm going to go through the sections. So from pages 4 to 55 are the new proposed 2021 tax support capital budget. So these are, again, not carryovers, these are new projects that are being proposed by staff for your consideration. They total about 27 million entirely, just to give you an order of magnitude there. And currently they're not funded. It would obviously require sort of you to adopt that portion of the program next year. And then throughout those pages, we've got the categories of capital, and then each page subsequently is a breakdown of all of the projects under those different capital areas. So that's your first section, pages 4 to 55. And I'll maybe just pause briefly, Mr. Mayor. I don't know, would you prefer if I go through the sections first, and then we can go through and answer any questions that you have?
Probably good if we just see if there's any questions for each section. Let's just keep it sectioned, and I don't know if you're going any deeper than that, the overall budget, or is there, I'm assuming everybody's already had a look at it. Is there anything anybody's looking at clarification from? Is that what you're looking for in that first part? Page 4 to 55, just, we're not going to go through it line by line today. We'll do that on the first, but is there any more of an overview you want to give us other than that's what's being proposed as new projects for 2021?
At this point, that was my intent, just to highlight it.
So is there any questions council has on what's being proposed in that first section to come forward on the first, where we can go from there? But is there any questions that anybody, Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
Is this any question on the pages up to page 55? Or, yeah, okay, I just, I'll have specific questions on December 1st, but I note that on page 40, which is the IT capital, they have items in there for Victoria Manor, like a Wander Guard system. And when I go to, and that's on page 40, and when I go to page 48, which is the Victoria Manor capital budget, it also has the Wander Guard system in there, and I'm wondering if we're counting it twice, if there are a couple of those Victoria Manor projects that are being counted twice, once in IT and once in Victoria Manor.
Just, you want to go ahead?
There we go. Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Elmsley. I asked the same question myself, actually, just to be sure, when the budget was being compiled. And so my understanding is that the projects you see in the IT section really are strictly IT-related type projects that would be managed by that division, whereas the related project you see under the Victoria Manor section is really related to physical alterations or improvements or upgrades that need to be done to the facility itself. That would be managed by Victoria Manor directly. So they're complementary projects, not the same projects.
Did you have a follow-up? That was it? We're in that section? Okay, yeah, no, and I think Ron said the staff will all be here when we go through this, and we will go through it line by line to answer your questions. I think they're just, if there's anything that you're looking for clarity on, or you want more information on, let's touch on it now so that they can bring it on December 1st.
Well,
And-
on that topic then, page 37, you have bus shelters and transit terminal. And I was just wondering why they weren't being funded from the gas tax, because they're transit related.
Sure, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Elmsley. I'm just pulling up that program right now, Transit Site Works. So my understanding regarding those two particular projects is, first of all, they're growth related. So they're expansionary in nature to expand the transit network to accommodate growth in and around Lindsay. And also that the recent application to the ISIP grant was successful regarding the transit stream. So that grant is picking up the non-growth related share of those two particular projects. So what that does is alleviate the provincial gas tax reserve from having to pick up that share of the cost.
Okay, Councillor Yo.
Thank you. For the December 1st coming up, if the answer is not available now, I'd like some information on page 49. The projects, there's 4 projects. 3 of them involve demolition at a cost of almost $140,000 for 3 buildings. And I'm wondering why we're demolishing them, and if they're surplus, why we're not selling them as is and saving the cost of demolition. I could see it with Laxton, Digby, Longford Roads Depot because it's so close to the dump, but the other 2 are in town, and don't know why we're spending $56,000 and $45,000 to tear it down to have an empty lot when they could be sold as is, as was the case with the Kirkfield, with the Cameron Orange Hall that we decided not to tear down at a cost of $50,000 years ago, ended up selling it, and they've actually fixed that up now and are living in it, I believe. So I'd like some answers on why we're demolishing these things at a cost and not deferring that cost of sale.
Okay, so are you making notes and you bring that information forward on the 1st? Perfect. Thank you. Councillor Seymour Fagan, go ahead.
Yes, I've got a question actually on the same page. We've got here, so we are going to demolish or sell the nurse practitioner building, but then we are going to renovate the Kirkfield Medical Center for a nurse practitioner. I guess it'll come from staff, but I'm just wondering where that nurse practitioner comes from. Does the city pay this nurse practitioner to work out of the medical center, or is it a private nurse practitioner? So that's something I'd just like to clarify. And then back on the transit site works, the bike stands. I don't know what bike stands are for the buses. Maybe you ride your bike and then you put it in a stand and you get on the bus. So it's $10,000 in ICIP grant. Can that, if we don't use that, can that be moved, or is it specific for stands? Can it be moved into shelters or something like that? So I just wanted those 2 clarified as well.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the first question would be answered on December 1st regarding the nurse practitioner's office, unless the CAO wants to or is able to answer it right now. The other question, or the second question about the bike stands, so it's true that it's being funded by the ISIP grant. That grant is structured in such a way that the city is given an allocation for which it can apply under various projects, and the list of projects is already fixed, I guess, based on what has been approved to date. So I don't know how much flexibility there is to shift funds around. That's something that would have to be looked into, but certainly we can look into that and come back on the 1st with a more definite answer.
I seem to recall that it was a grant specific for bike racks, that we applied for it, we got it, and that's what it's used for, but if you can just confirm that, that'd be great for the 1st.
Yeah.
Any other? Councillor Ashmore?
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, to Adam, or the CAO, just 3 quick questions. So the roads that are listed under gravel resurfacing and rural reconstruction, these are the ones that will be deemed to be done first? Like, do they differentiate from the 5-year roads plan, or are we just taking them off the most urgent from the 5-year roads plan? So the ones you have listed here, they're the ones that staff have said are going to be done next year. Is that correct?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. So there's 2 programs involved here. Rural resurfacing is based on the 5-year roads plan, which I believe was recently updated through council. And I think the one exception is you'll see on the deferral list, there's Tracy's Hill Road on that list. That's the one roads. So that's the one project from rural resurfacing which was deferred into 2022. And then regarding the gravel resurfacing program, that list is identical to what was just approved by council in the 10-year gravel resurfacing plan, except that there was one road scheduled in that plan for 2021, which turns out was actually just resurfaced not too long ago through surplus funding in that program. And so that road was just simply pushed out accordingly. But other than that one exception, it's what you see here in the budget's identical to what was approved by council in the plan.
Okay, thanks. 2 more questions. The next one is landfill site works and facilities. Do we have, this is over $2 million, do we have any money coming from provincial government or any other help towards this from other sources besides our own funding? If we're mandated to do all this, like, is there any help on the way from any other sources to complete these projects?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not aware of any existing grant programs that would be targeted to these types of projects, although we do constantly keep an eye on what's out there in terms of grants and how those grants are changing over time. But to date, as you can see here, all the funding is capital reserve based, so we're not aware of any grants currently that would be applicable to these particular projects.
Okay, and lastly, information technology systems. Are we going to be doing what the provincial government, and they're extending their hardware turnaround time, or are we replacing more of this equipment more quickly, or is there anything that we've looked at to maybe have some cost savings on the hardware? It seems like the hardware, which is really expensive to replace, we're replacing it more frequently, or do we have some sort of a IT strategy, I guess, as to look at some savings in this, because it's really adding up as well. Like, I just wanted to know if you had any background on to justify why these hardware items have to be replaced.
Can we get some background on that just for December 1st? That's probably the best way to do it.
Yep.
Is that okay, Councillor? Oh, perfect. Anything else? Councillor Richardson?
I think we're just going up to page 56, right? I have a question for next section.
Don't get ahead of us. So I have a couple, and then I know Councillor Yo's got one. So I'm just looking for some more information on a couple things. One is the fleet. The information, I don't need to know what color a lawnmower is, what kind of tires you're putting on it, but The description for our fleet that we're purchasing, I know it's part of our policy, but it's pretty vague. And I'm just wondering if for the first, we could just have a little bit more detail on, you know, some of the ones that are being replaced and why. I understand they're all part of the asset management program and we've passed a fleet policy, but I wouldn't mind, I don't know who that direction is to, but just a little, that's just me, just a little more information on that. And then the other one is the Mariposa Hall particulate air cleaner system. I struggle with this because we're spending $2 million on a brand new fire hall and now we need another $35,000 for an air cleaner. So I'm just, again, if we can just get some details on why that wasn't part of the original build when we built a new building. And then the heavy-duty pickup truck under fire where it says there's a replacement cost avoidance. I don't know what that means. We're spending 200, but cost avoiding 325. So just a little bit of clarity when the director's available, and that's all I need. Councillor Yeo, you got one? Go ahead. Did I do it?
Yeah, you just got me in the heavy-duty pickup truck, so that's good.
Well, sorry about that. That's all I had. Is there anybody else had anything else in this section? And if not, we'll move. And that's not to say if a question comes up on the first, you know, we'll have staff available to answer. We're just trying to get ahead of as much of it as we can. Go ahead.
Parkland furniture on page 50, it's only a small item, 40,000. I thought we were originally planning on doing substantially more than that, but is it just because of restraints that we're not putting more into that? With the benches, the garbage cans, and similar.
That's it. That'll be a decision unit if we choose to take it forward. This is their proposed budget annually.
Yeah.
We've talked about as a decision unit increasing that, so we'll have that decision to make on the first, but it's not part of the core budget. Okay? So it hasn't got lost. Councillor Seymour Fagan?
Sure, just in fleet, again, I had a question. It says ice machine. I don't know if that's a Zamboni or what, because we have arenas that are closed right now. So just a question on that one, what it is.
So we'll get clarity on all of those for the first as part of the fleet replacement. That's a good question, actually.
Just on page 46, the ambulances are in at 330,000. Do we still get 50% funding on ambulances from the province, if we get an answer on that?
Yeah, sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor. We receive 50% funding from the province for amortization of our paramedic assets. So not for the upfront purchase, but once we purchase an asset that's used for paramedic service, then that asset depreciates over time, over its life cycle. Half of that depreciation cost, even though it's not a cost in terms of cash, but that half of that depreciation cost is funded back to us by the province. And you'll see here in this program, there's a grant from the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, adds up to $155,000. That's roughly the funding we'll receive from the province for specifically that purpose.
That makes sense. Thank you. Any other questions on this section? If not, we'll move on. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And again, through you, I do want to reiterate your comment because I think it's important. We don't want to put council on the spot. You've only seen this for a week. This was just an opportunity to highlight some interests or items that you wanted posed so we could do our homework. But to your point, we will have a full sort of group of staff available to answer any questions once you get time to dig into the budget a little bit better. So the next section is pages 56 to 60, and that's the section talking about reserves and deferred revenue. You heard pretty substantive update from the treasurer already, and the summary page was one of the slides. The other pages, 57, 58, right through to 60, are really then highlighting all of the different reserves, what are the year-end balances this year, and contributions.
Councillor Helmsley?
Pause again.
Thank you. If somebody could tell me what a door reserve is, that's on page 57 for $1,765,000.
Sorry, can you just repeat do you say door?
Door, D-O-O-R.
Right, got it. Thank you.
Okay, well, we'll get an update for you. It's affordable rentals, but we'll get an update for you. Anything else on the reserves? It's pretty self-explanatory. Go ahead, Councillor Seymour Fagan.
Yeah, hi. I just don't know what the Council Economic Development Reserve is, so if they could explain that then, that would be great.
Just more clarity on the Economic Development Reserve, okay?
Sorry, I was just jotting down the notes. So then the next sections, so section 3 talks about capital projects. Now we're talking about 2020 approved capital projects that are either delayed or deferred. And so just want to, so from pages 62 to 71, those were 2020 projects that have now resumed. So they were planned, they were paused, but we've been able to now reactivate them and start them in the latter quarter predominantly of this year. They will carry over into 2021. There is some stats in terms of when we're anticipating completion of those. And just to give you a highlight, there then is a totaling of those. So those projects total about 36 million in total value. And we've just scratched the surface in actual spending for those of about 4 million. So we still have 32 million in that already funded category or group of projects to continue on and finish in 2022. The second part of the charting, so pages 72 through to 77, those are still 2020 capital projects that were approved by you. They're funded, but they have not started yet. They have been entirely deferred to start next year, but they do form part of our 2021 overall program. And those additional projects total about $6 million. So as you can see, when I mentioned early on, this isn't simply just a catch-up budget. I think we still are aggressively investing in the critical capital and infrastructure that we need. And the overall spending, when you put it all in, is actually higher than what we would have anticipated in the given year. But obviously recognizing a lot are those deferrals pushing through to the next year. So maybe I'll pause there briefly, Mr. Mayor, if there's any questions on the
Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
deferrals.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bobcaygeon Arena parking lot, I was under the impression that we had put that project off when we did budget deliberations last year. Could you just check and make sure that it didn't get put back in by error or something? Thank you.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Mayor, to the council, I can answer that right now, actually. So that project was approved as part of the 2020 budget. I think in large part because the Bobcaygeon Agricultural Society came forward to the city and offered to pay for half of the cost. And so I think that is what probably allowed council to proceed with that project. So I think it's been delayed or deferred, but certainly not dropped from the capital program. So it will proceed. That's my understanding.
Does that mean that the project is actually 50,000 or it's 200,000?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe the total estimated cost is 100,000 with the city and the Agricultural Society split in the cost evenly. So 50,000 each.
But in the book it shows 100,000. Does that mean that as part of the capital budget, it's been charged at 100,000 or it's been charged at 50,000?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so total, we have to distinguish between expenditure and funding. So it's $100,000 in total estimated expenditure. And then that $100,000 is funded, $50,000 from the capital reserve, $50,000 coming from a third-party contributor, in this case, the Agricultural Society. And that's, and if I can add, that is the way we always budget for projects. We always budget for the total cost in the expenditure column, and then we'll show in other columns how that's funded. So for instance, when we do work on a boundary road with a neighboring municipality, we always budget for the whole cost, and then we'll show in the funding the contribution that will come from the neighboring municipality.
Thank you.
Just an example.
Okay, Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The speed limit signs for urban areas was deferred this year. I just can't find it in the book. My understanding is that we're going to take that 3-year project. We're going to do the 2 years in 2021. We deferred the 2021, and we're going to do 2020 and 2021 in the coming year. I just can't find it in the book. Did that get missed?
Why don't we get that information for you for December 1st? We'll get an update if that's okay on that program. Does that work, gentlemen? Just how it's rolling out, because I don't see it in here either, so.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mr. Mayor. I think it would be more fruitful to have that one come back on the 1st.
Perfect, thank
So
you.
I'm not familiar with specifically that program.
Councillor Riley, go ahead.
Thank you. The Wilson Parkland Estate Program for 110, we just do batching, right? We're 50-50 with them? So that means that we're not putting our contribution in this year?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. No, we are contributing our usual 55,000, so our usual half of the cost of that program, and the other half made up by the community. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions on that section? Councillor Ashmore?
To you too, Adam. The first question, page 64. Just wondering if I can get a bit more explanation on the County Road 36 Emily Creek culvert. Why is it costing $360,000? And what is the details of it? I wasn't aware of it. Not against it, but just wondering whether there's options like horizontal directional drilling or something like that that would be less expensive, or can I just get a bit more information on that if I could?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not 100% sure about this particular project, so I think it's another candidate to come back on the 1st.
So just some background
Yeah.
information on that project for the 1st would be perfect. Okay?
Sure.
And just finally, page 69, Fire Services, Omimi Fire Hall entrance. I know it's not a huge amount of money, but this fire hall, I'm not sure if everybody knows, but it is getting quite aged, and I'm just wondering how this relates to the master fire plan, because someday down the road, hopefully sooner than later, this hall is going to be replaced, and why are we spending this amount of money on the fire hall right now when we potentially could be looking at a new one?
So for the 1st, we'll get rationale on the fire hall entrance for the Omimi Fire Hall?
Yes.
Okay.
As it relates to the master fire plan.
Overall
too.
plan for the building? Yep. Okay, they're making notes. Anyone else? Councillor Seymour Fagan?
Yes, it's money's already spent, so it's number 1 on page 62, it's community services. The furniture for our 68 Lindsay Street. So it's $130,000 over budget. Why don't they just stop spending? I just don't understand, because that money came forward in addition to the original budget for the building, because furniture wasn't budgeted into it. So it's just a question. I would kind of like to know what's going on there. Thanks.
Okay. Just make sure Ron's got that. You got that one, Ron? Thank you. Anyone else? Anywhere else? Okay, I see none. We'll move on to deferred.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So through you, the next section, pages 78 to 83. This is new to any of our sort of budget deliberations, if you will, but in my mind, and I think our team's mind, it was critical or important that we at least exposed, or you understood, while we're recommending a trimmed down new 2021 capital budget. Obviously, pre-pandemic, we were looking at spending almost double on new projects next year. And so, as you can appreciate, when we've had 8 months of delays on many projects, and we just need to actually push that work practically down into 2021, it displaces other projects. And so what we tried to do here was simply listing for your information, based on what we're recommending be included in the 2021, These would have been the projects that either based on our different asset management plans, our certain master plans, or maybe direction from you, that they were included in the 2021, at least base budget for consideration. And certainly, I do want to acknowledge, because I hope everybody appreciates the timing of this in order to accelerate the capital budget. I mean, we certainly are aware that there are other priorities that are emerging, either through you, through task forces, or through even just the conversation we had 2 weeks ago on capital decision units that you wanted to bring forward. This was published sort of in tandem with that, so you're not going to see some of the responses that we gave. They're in the deferral list for a certain reason, but there's certainly, these are ones that are open for discussion. Ultimately, you approved the budget, and so we just wanted to make sure that they were listed so that you knew what we were proposing in the base budget at least.
So on December 1st, will we have an opportunity to, once we've passed our capital budget, to recognize that these should be preferred projects? I don't know if that's the right word, but these should be the top projects coming forward in the 2022 capital budget. I know we're not going to approve them, but can we do a follow-up resolution at that time saying we understand that these are deferred if there are whatever comes out of it, but that we want, as a council in 2022, these need to be the priority projects coming forward, capital, before we start bringing other things forward and then pushing some of these off again? Is that a direction we can give after the 1st?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, certainly. And in fact, in the body of the report, at least from a staff perspective, we're recommending that based on displacing these projects, we would share that and actually recommend that, unless you tell us different, they would form the baseline 2022 capital budget in the base.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Helmsley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know to whom, but the Colburn Street project in Fenelon Falls, I look forward to discussing it on December 1st as a decision unit, and hopefully we will have a discussion and things will work out as I believe they should. I won't make my arguments now and then do it again on the 1st. I will do it on the 1st. But I'll also point out that as part of that project, or as an addendum to that project, is the bridge in Fenelon Falls, and I don't see that anywhere in the budget or in the deferral, but the preliminary work and the design and engineering work was done in 2020. So perhaps somebody could look into what the status of the bridge in Fenelon Falls is. And as I say, I'll be looking forward to some kind of a resolution on Colburn Street. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so I will confirm that you already directed that Colburn Street be brought forward, at least through the task force recommendation. You subsequently adopted it as committee of the whole, and then as council, you'll, I would assume, approve that direction to include as a decision unit the downtown Fenelon project. So I'm glad you raised it, because again, this is a perfect example of, we know that that's in progress. We know that direction's there, so that will come forward without any further direction needed today.
Without any further direction, will it come forward with different financing options as part of that decision unit, or do we need to specifically ask for that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, any decision unit direction you give, we would provide at least options for financing.
Thank you. You're good. Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Yeah, just a very quick generic question. Your first report of the day, you identified that we were falling behind in our funding to meet our 10-year plan. By deferring the 2020 stuff to 2021 at all, is that going to help us bring that back into line? And you don't have to answer that today unless you got it right at the top of your, but is that going to solve part of the problem?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Well, certainly in the short term, it helps alleviate the pressure. And that's not to pretend that there isn't an impact down the road. There certainly is. And I think that's what you're alluding to. I think really the intent is to give ourselves a breather, as sort of the CAO has been saying, give us a chance to reset the long-term financial plan, but not forgetting that the current plan we're on is something that was adopted by council, and we need to do our best to try to achieve it. But I think really the large answer to your question is going to come through that update to the long-term financial plan. So I would mostly defer to that, if that's okay.
I think it's going to help with our finances in the long term, but it's putting us behind catching up on our capital program, obviously, because we're deferring some of them, right? So I think it's a little bit of both, but yeah, I'll let the finance people sort that out, not me. Councillor Yeo, you had a question?
Yeah, just on the comment that this deferrals for 2021 to 2022, and the comment that they're going to form the baseline of what's going to happen a year from now. To me, that's putting a whole nother level of, I could argue more for the deferrals than I could for the budget that's in front of us. So I'm wondering how in stone is that going to be, and how hard do we go at that list? Or do we just say, okay, nice base, and we spend all our hot air next year? Because there's some stuff in the list for 2022 that frankly we've turned down in previous years, so I'm just wondering where we go.
CEO's going to respond.
I'll start. You may have to respond to some of it too, but through you to the councillor. So, I mean, again, the intent, if there wasn't a pandemic this year and we were going and entering into a normal budget deliberation, all of those projects would have been included today in front of you for the 2021 capital budget. And whether, I mean, obviously they're subject to debate, but they are based on either pulling forward, based on our asset management plans, based on our master plans. So they would have been in the budget. So maybe it does defer some discussion on them down the line. But again, at the same time, it was also meant to expose, there may be some that staff are recommending go to 2022, but you put a higher priority on. And so if you wanted those to be considered in 2021, that's your objective. So again, that's really what it was for. I don't think it's ever going to have the debate go away, but what we're saying is that these are the ones that would have been in 2021. So at minimum, unless you say otherwise, we would put them in the base budget for 2022, and then you can work on it from there, what you want to include beyond them.
And that's just the budget that'll come forward. We can, you know, there's items in here too that I would question how bad we need them in 2022. So we can have that discussion when that budget, but these are the ones that will be brought forward first before anything automatically gets bumped. And if you've got something in here, and this is an opportunity, if you want to propose switching this for something that's in 2021, if you feel that there's a bigger priority and you want to, now's the opportunity to say, give me a rationale for this, and let's make a decision unit for, you know, if you want a Memorial Park washrooms and you want to say, I want to bring that forward as a decision unit, I want the Garnet Graham washrooms to be deferred for a year, good luck with that argument. But if you want to have that, then, you know, now's the time to sort of have that discussion and get the information coming forward from the first. This is just, you know, staff are working within the budget and the workload, you know, or if you want to add something, then bring it forward as a decision unit. We can look at financing options if council wants to make that motion and go forward. But, you know, at the end of the day, that's what it's here for, to sort of get a bit of that's already been approved. So I'm just using that as an example, councillor. So don't skin me alive. But I opened that tender, so you're good. But go ahead, Ron, if you want to add to that.
I think through you, Mr. Mayor, and just to conclude then sort of the whole section, I guess one of the other things that, again, there's a lot of moving parts. We're moving very quickly on this, but on December 1st, one of the other items that we wanted to accelerate or bring forward to you was you had passed a resolution asking us to look at a rebate program utilizing the 2019 surplus that we currently held in a reserve. We want to bring that back to you because I think not just that issue alone, but then some of the other pandemic funds that you talked about, Mr. Mayor, I mean, you really can't make good informed decisions if you don't know what our finances are beyond what you're seeing today. So we certainly acknowledge and appreciate that. So on December 1st, we want to bring back some updates to you on immediate funding sources or options. Those are just two that are top of mind.
Thank you. So is there any further questions on that deferred part? Councillor Ashmore?
Thank you. Just a question, just two things, and kind of small, but they're important. Page 80, Coronation Hall building envelope, 40,000, that's been pushed off to 2022. I'm just wondering if I could get more information from Jorg Peterson, the manager of buildings and properties, if this is going to have any effect, negative effect on the integrity of the building. We want to save that building, but it's in pretty decent shape, but we're putting it off for another year. I just wanted to double check if I could get some more information on what is the most urgent expenditure that has to be done there.
I think we can get you some information. I'm going to assume Jorg knows what he's doing, and if it was going to affect the integrity of the building, it wouldn't have been deferred to 2022, but we can certainly get that information for you on the first.
And one more thing here, Verlem, page 81, Verlem Centennial Park washroom, it's being demolished. Have we not looked at what it would cost just to replace it? It's not a very big washroom, but that's a well-used park, and I just want to know what it would cost to just replace it, a very small washroom. So we're taking it away from them. If we demolish it, it's gone for good. If you don't look to the future and say we're going to rebuild it, then it's worth a...
Probably a better argument for 2022. It's not being proposed in this year's budget, so can I just suggest when it comes forward next year, then have that rationale or have a discussion with staff beforehand and see what the options are? It's not really an issue unless you're proposing moving it up for this year.
No, that's fine.
Okay. Anything else? Anyone else? Okay. Is that all you have, Ron, just as far as an overview on the budget?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yep. Thanks again for the guidance and direction. We'll bring answers to those questions either in advance or formally at December 1st. And just remind, still we'll need a recommendation to receive not just the report, but the budget just in general.
Doing that right now.
Thank you.
So we have a motion that the report CA 2020-004 in your binder, proposed 2021 tax support capital budget, and the tax support capital budget attached as Appendix A to the report be received. If I can get Councillor Yeo and Dunn. And just before we pass it, on page 4 of your report, on the back, these highlighted blue ones, I just want to highlight those. Those were brought forward just as it's the Cobequid washrooms. They were sort of highlighted when we had the previous one. They're being deferred to 2022. The Angeline Street sidewalk, is that coming forward, Ron, do you know, as a decision unit, or has that been deferred, or where's that one was left? It's in the book?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's in the book for 2021. The sidewalk replacement program and Angeline Street is listed in the 2021 proposed budget.
Okay, but we had a discussion about that previously. Can we get information on that? Because in the deferred section, there's 3 sections of sidewalk across the rest of the city that have been deferred, and I just want to know, are we deferring those because we've made this a bigger priority, or was this sort of part of the long-term plan all along? I just would like some clarification before we proceed with it. And then the other 3, Councillor, one is Princess Street, that's been deferred to 2022 discussions. And then the other 3, the economic recovery, Coburn Street, to your comment, in Fenelon, the downtown, the waste receptacles in parks and downtown, and the boat launch and trail have all been endorsed by the committee as decision units going forward, so we don't need to do them again. So as long as we're clarity on that, then I think we're good with where we are. Any final questions on that? So we have a motion to receive. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Okay, thanks for that. Adam, are you sticking around for the others? Awesome. Okay, 6.2, we'll ask Director Shanks, and I don't know if Jorg is joining him, is the presentation on the renovations regarding project update for City Hall. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. I'll turn it over to you for the presentation. Craig, I don't know if you want to start. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, and thank you for the opportunity. I will give a quick overview of both the presentation and report CS 2020-012, City Hall renovations update. It will be brief and not go into detail so as to not duplicate information within the presentation itself. Over the past 5 years, the city has been undertaking a large project to renovate, refresh, and invest in City Hall. This has been an extensive project, $2.9 million to date, with the largest component being the HVAC now in need. The city has approved $1.49 million in previous capital budgets for the HVAC system, with another $800,000 notionally approved in the 2020 multi-year project. This leaves a shortfall of $1.976 million being requested, and when you include the $800,000 from the notionally approved multi-year project, a gap and a need of $2.76 million at this time. The reasons for the shortfall are when this project was initially brought forward in 2015, there's been a sharp escalation in prices, which has resulted in the need for more funds. When it was first proposed, a detailed design was not available, so this reflects a more accurate costing estimate. There has been further equipment failures leading to a higher cost. Regulation changes and the pandemic occurring has led to a greater need and awareness for and of air quality control and the need for the HVAC work. And previous projects, which have been highlighted in the presentation and the report, specifically building envelope and council chamber renovation projects, had higher costs than anticipated, utilizing more of the previously approved and committed funding for the City Hall renovations. I will now turn it over to Mr. Peterson, Manager of Building Property, for the presentation. And I would ask that it's about a 5 to 7 minute presentation. We save questions until the end when we'll be able to try to answer questions on either the presentation or the report itself.
Good afternoon, Council, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present this presentation. We're intending to inform about the ongoing HVAC issues, or heating, ventilating, air conditioning issues with the facility, and the recommendations with options for replacement that are contained in this presentation. Key factors in the equation are the overall age of the facility and the timing of most recent renovations. The building dates back to the late 1980s, so we're reaching that point in the age of the building where major reinvestment is required. It's sort of a generational thing. The fact that most of the component parts of the building have exceeded that life cycle typically happens around 25 to 30 years within the age of a building. This part of reinvesting in City Hall is a very large project that needs to be phased in over a period of years, or it can be phased in over a period of years, again, depending on the option that we're choosing here. Changing to the next slide, facility investment to date. Over the past 5 years, the city has invested nearly $3 million in enhancements to the facility. This includes items such as the building envelope, the refurbishments to council chambers in the Victoria Room, the other interior improvements that we've made, which are smaller, things about carpet and paint and stuff. We've also done a fair bit of work already around the systems in the building, and we've done some work on the HVAC system. There's a growing need, a requirement to further replace the HVAC system due to ongoing failures, the cost to maintain, health and safety concerns. The replacement will be assisting the city's attempts to meet the Healthy Environment Plan and goals related to that, lowering things like maintenance costs, repair costs, and back to the Healthy Environment Plan, energy consumption and the carbon footprint. On to the next slide. The staff proposal would be to complete the project in an expedited fashion. We're presenting 3 different possible options, but the one that we're recommending is the expedited approach. It would take about 18 months, so for completion in early 2022. That would entail major components such as replacing and upgrading old and deficient equipment, increasing the overall system performance, replacing and improving the piping, the ducting, improving the control systems, and introducing an automated building control system as part of that. As Director Shanks has mentioned, the overall cost would be in the order of $2.5 million. About $1.5 million is already allocated, which leaves us with about a gap of about $2.7 million. That's including consideration of the $800,000 that Director Shanks was mentioning earlier on. On to the next slide. What are the projected benefits? There are many benefits to the project. The slide covers them in short form. Mainly, we're looking at having better control of the building, better control of the HVAC system so that we can achieve more efficiencies and we can improve performance overall. So building controls are a very important part. And very, very importantly, especially in the time that we're in right now, to improve air quality, we have a deficit in the building of about 1,500 CFM. For those that may remember back to the 1970s and the 1980s, there was a lot of emphasis being put then on buildings to tighten them up. And as a result, air quality suffered. For those who remember back in the 80s, we had something called sick building syndrome. This building was designed in the 80s. And much of what we have right now in terms of systems is really of that legacy. So the standards have increased. Ventilation standards have increased about 30% right now. So especially during this time of the pandemic, that becomes an important thing for us. Reduced energy consumption, of course, something very important for us to try to achieve, and we think we can through this project, reducing our carbon footprint, improving on maintenance costs, and as I've mentioned, increasing the system performance, and to a lesser extent, but also adding to how we can manage space better in the building. On to the next slide. As mentioned, there are three basic options. The option that we're recommending is the expedited option. That's option number one. Would see a need for $4.25 million to complete that work on a more quick turnaround basis. Part of our challenge here is if we spread this out over a longer period of time, we spend the money and don't really reap the rewards until later on in the project. So with an expedited process, it costs less, we get the benefits faster, and we think that's an important thing to consider here. If we spread it out over a longer period of time, yes, we spread our costs out, but we also push our benefits out further, and we still have those costs even incrementally earlier on in the project. So the other options would see the duration of the project extended to 3 years in one case, that would be option number 2, or 5 years with option number 3. This would not only take longer, as I mentioned, but would also push out those benefits. There is a gap, though, in the funding we were talking about today, and that gap would increase depending on the option that we're looking at, in large part because of increased cost over time. We're looking at cost escalation. We don't have a perfect view of what that looks like, but we're estimating that escalation could be in the order of about 3% per year. Again, for that reason, we're recommending the expedited project. The following slides 7 to 9, explain the cost breakouts for those three options. Council will see that the base construction cost is consistent from one option to the next. It's about $3.6 million. Escalation increases year over year. If we look at the next option up, we're into $157,000 worth of escalations, and if we look at the next option out from there, we're looking at $355,000. Some might wonder why we're accounting already in the expedited option a $90,000 escalation. It's because the estimates that we've got together based on the contract documents that have been produced already 2020. So if the construction is going to happen in 21 and 22, we're already beginning to see escalation even in the expedited version of the project. We've already committed and sunk money into this project to the tune of about $475,000. Part of that has been with respect to consulting costs. Part of that has been with respect to already purchasing equipment that we would be using in this project, notably a cooling tower, a brand new cooling tower. For those who may know where that cooling tower is, it's in between the old jail and the HR building. That cooling tower is 30 years old now. It's reached the end of its life. We've just been holding it together with binder twine, and we're grateful that we've got a new one ready to go now. The other slides really just cover those other options. So looking at the next slide over, considering options, current option number 2, I'd like to point out that we're looking at an increase, an escalation rather, related to that of $157,000. And the breakout for option number 3 on the next slide over, slide 9, shows an escalation of about $355,000 on top. So the further out we push this project, the more we're going to be into cost escalation. So the recommendation, as we stated, is to proceed with the expedited option, both to have a project completed quicker, achieve those results, those benefits more quickly. Importantly, things that relate to the improved air quality, but also the energy consumption, the carbon footprint reductions, reducing maintenance costs, and supporting our strategic directions around things like the Healthy Environment Plan, and importantly, again, dealing with pandemic protocols. The next slide over, Appendix A, it gives an outline of what the basic component parts are in this project. I mentioned the cooling tower before. There are compressors that need to be replaced or installed rather. There's new piping that's going in. There's a boiler that's going to be replaced. We have new interior equipment that's going to be put in. And we've got new rooftop equipment as well. And we've got a new control system that we're going to install. Appendix B. Regardless of which option we're choosing, every one of those options involves phasing the work. So the phases that we're showing here on the next slides, there's 3 slides, those phases would happen whether we're going to expedite the project or whether we're going to do it in an extended fashion. It's just a question of how far out we spread these things. It's difficult to split the work up and have people in the building at the same time. So the way we've come up with this is to phase and to stage the work as we're describing in these following slides. This option, Appendix B shows the first phase as being essentially work to be done in the basement. So it's not going to affect people on the upper floors in the building. We would look to do this work during a shoulder season so that we wouldn't have as much of an impact on the heating or cooling requirements for the building. But all that work would be in the basement. It would include installing compressors, replacing the boiler, putting in a new duct underneath the ground below the driveway to the west of City Hall, over to HR, and connecting up with the cooling tower. The next phase would be doing work on the east side of the building, essentially, and also on the rooftop. So we would have to talk about staging staff in the building at that point. We might look at having staff work from home to try and ease the demand for staging, or look to move staff in other locations at other facilities across the city during the period of time this work is going on. The staff on the clear parts of the illustration, the parts that are not affected by the construction, they would be able to continue in the building and would be able to continue working in that space. The next slide over, phasing and staging the work again, continued. Looking at phase 3, we're switching over to the other side of the building. So that would put the people on the west side having to stage somewhere else, whether working from home, as I mentioned, or in some other building. And the work would be carried out on the west side. Again, we'd be putting in new ductwork, new piping, new equipment on the roof and throughout the space, while staff on the east side of the building would be able to continue to operate. To the last slide, Appendix C, the project will have a full team effort, including staff from building and property as a project lead. We would run the project. Health and safety would be involved. We, of course, are going to have consultants. We have consultants already on the project and the contractors. And there would be a team involving different representation from departments that are affected by this work. In a nutshell, that's the project. Thank you very much. Pleased to answer any questions.
Thanks, York and Craig. I'm sure there's a few questions. I have a couple I'll start with. I guess the first question, and probably the question we all have, is how can this be 200% over budget if it's 1.4 was what we have originally, and now we're looking for another almost 2.8? You're almost talking 200% over budget. I understand things have changed since 2015, but did we miss this one, or did we miss something, or is it just the depth of what we need to do is way greater than what we originally thought it was?
To you, Mr. Mayor and Council. So again, right now we have an allocated budget of roughly 1.5. You have to take in the 800,000 that was requested through the multi-year project. So in fact, we had assigned a $2.3 million project to it. I do recognize that still would leave a gap of 1.976 million. And then when you take the 800,000 out of it, that was previously approved 2.76. So it's just under double the price that was suggested. And that goes to my overview for it and the 5 components that have driven for the increase in this price. Part of it because it is now 5 years older. So therefore cost cost escalations have taken place, more breakdowns have occurred. Part of it is due to the fact that we do now have a more detailed design on it, so have a better understanding and a more accurate estimation of what the cost will be. Part of it as well is because we have used some of the funding that we were going to assign to this specific project to do some of the other renovations to City Hall that we had talked about. And those were the renovations to council chambers and the building envelope itself. There was some additional expenses that we had not planned for, certainly in relation to the building envelope. So that hopefully that answers some of that question, but it is certainly understood that the request for funding and the overall cost of the project is greater than what was originally anticipated.
Thank you. So the 2.7 that we're looking for in extra funding, but we're getting back 800 in multi-year funding, so it's almost 1.9 extra in funding overall in the project. Is that correct?
To you, Mr. Mayor, that's probably the simplest way to explain it. The Director of Corporate Services, Jennifer Stover, might have a different way of stating it more clearly, but in general layman terms, I would suggest yes, that's a good explanation.
Thank you. And will this project go out for tender? Is that the plan, that it goes out for tender? Because I'm wondering, if we put it out for tender, how do you start talking about escalation costs? I mean, if we get a tender, we get a price, and I'm assuming they're committing to a price. But when we're talking escalation costs over option one, I'm not sure how you're factoring it. You know, a tender's a tender. I assume they give us a price, we're going to hold them to that price, and here's the work that needs to be done, and that's the budget.
To you, Mr. Mayor, yes, it will certainly go out to tender as per the procurement policies within the city. The escalation costs that are being recommended and suggested within this is taking into account the duration of the project. So what we're suggesting is if we do it over an 18-month period, there's 90,000 from basically what the estimates we had previously. If we're extending it to a 3-year project, then we're suggesting the additional cost will be 157,000 or 60,000 over that original 18-month project. If we're extending it to a 5-year project, then we can anticipate a 355,000 escalation, which is roughly 265,000 more than on the expedited option. So you're right, the tender will come back with that price and we will hold them to it. But if it's an 18-month versus a 3-year versus a 5-year project, those are the cost increases that we would expect as a result of the extended duration of time.
Okay, and my final question, thank you for that. If we do it, say option, just as an example, option 2 over 3 years, can we, and we want to pay for it over 3 years, can we tender a multi-year project? Can we put out a tender for the work but want it completed, sort of commit to the funding over the 3 years but get the full project scope, understanding it's going to cost marginally more because it's over 3 years, but still commit to the project but fund it over 3 years and still have one tender for the whole scope of the work? Can we do that?
Again, to you, Mr. Mayor, and Director Stover might want to provide some clarification on this, but as long as we've got the budget approved, then we will be good to proceed. How the city basically pays for that budget, whether it's through the capital reserve, whether it's if the city chose to pay it back through some kind of special debenture, then that's something that doesn't really impact on the availability of the funds to be able to go out and tender. But again, Director Stover might want to provide some clarity on that specific answer.
Thank you. I don't think you quite answered my question, so can you give me a little bit of clarity there? I'm just, from a tender perspective, if we get a price, but we're telling the contractor we're going to fund it over 3 years, we need this much work done each year over 3 years, can we still get one tender, or do we have to tender it every year as the individual budgets get improved?
Through you. So I think what Director Shanks was trying to allude to is that escalated cost, if we go to a tender today and say we want this work completed within a year, we would anticipate the cost to be less because the company, whoever bids on it and is successful, knows that they're committing their resources to that project for a specific duration of time. They're in and out. We can do a tender that says this is our phased-in plan, that we want it done over a period of time, whether that's 3 years, 5 years, whatever. But we would anticipate that the costs would escalate because that organization would be spreading the work out, would have resources tied up on this project for a much longer period of time. The alternative would be to fund it over 5 years and tender it in the 5th year and get it done that way, or in year 4. There's many ways we could go about this.
Thank you. Okay, I'll shut up. Councillor Helmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to whoever can answer the question. You're talking about staging and relocating employees in a staged manner. Would it make any difference, and would it shorten the time frame and therefore the cost if you emptied the building of people completely and did it all at once?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I believe, and this is in talks with Director Stover and the CAO, because it's predominantly their two staffing groups that are housed within City Hall. So again, I'll look to them to clarify if I don't have the 100% correct information. But my understanding of the situation is that the majority of the staff that will be impacted during the different phases will have the ability to work from home, and there will not be a need to relocate them to other city facilities, with perhaps some minor exceptions. The rationale for the expedited option of 18 months, and I believe, is that that is the quickest that we would be able to achieve the full task in getting it completed. So I appreciate the question, but I believe the expedited option is as quick as we could get it completed, which will allow for the cheapest solution to take place. Again, I'll look for either the CAO or Director Stover to perhaps clarify if my comments on staff are wrong, or if Manager Peterson has any clarifications on the timing. I would look to any of them to provide that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll just add to what Director Shanks was talking about, and maybe roll that in also to the question or the discussion previous. Quite rightly, when this is tendered, we'll know exactly what the cost is, and we'll know what the schedule is. We have been conservative on both counts, not wanting to come back to the well a second or a third time. This is about having clarity, as Director Shanks was saying, with the documentation that we've got right now, and wanting to embark on a process here which is going to be very clear about what the tendered cost is and what the schedule is to deliver the project. We could get lucky. We could find that we get better pricing. We could get lucky and find that we get better scheduling. And if that's possible, then we'll get it done faster and we'll get it done cheaper.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer. I have another question, and you may not have the answer to it, and I would take an answer from whatever's on the asset register, and that is, do we know what this building is worth?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, as part of the asset registry within the city, yes, we do have a complete audit of that facility, and we have a what that facility is worth. Unfortunately, I don't have that with me at this time, so I'd be happy to. It will take me about 5 seconds to look it up afterwards, and I will either send to you directly to all of council, whatever is desired, what the value of the City Hall facility is based in our asset registry.
My question is predicated on if we're spending close to $5 million on air conditioning and the building's only worth $3.5 million, you know, is it a pig in a poke kind of thing? So I was just curious as to what the asset value of the structure is.
Yeah, I would think it's worth a little more than that.
I will send in information, or I'm looking it up right now. So if we're still talking about this while this is going on, I'll have an answer for you shortly, perhaps.
I'm pretty sure we will be. Councillor Yeo, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, and through you to Jorg, I guess. It sounds like, given the cost of this thing, like you're putting a whole new system in beside the old system. Because to upgrade to carry an extra 1,500 CFMs of air, like this is an outstanding price. Like this is bewildering to the mind to think it would cost millions of dollars to increase by 1,500 CFMs. So are you putting a whole new system in, for my curiosity?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, in fact, we are talking about doing exactly that. Part of the challenge that we've got is, for example, if you have a box on the roof and it's providing fresh air into the building, maybe one logic would be put a bigger box on the roof so you can push more air into the building. Reality is, though, that the ducts inside the building are only a certain size. You'll have more difficulty getting the air in. Then if you look at the way the building is laid out, we have equipment which really doesn't lend itself to pushing air around inside the building very, very well. We've got 52 heat pumps around the outside of the building. On the inside, those ones that sit underneath windows, they're not bringing in fresh air, they're just tempering the air. But they move a lot of air around, and they do that with a high air stream, which is not a good thing. Having high velocity air inside office space is not a good thing if you're thinking about COVID and the current pandemic and the protocols related to that. So it really isn't that simple a challenge. It is really something complex. We can't just put bigger boxes on the roof. We can't just put some new ducts in the building. And if we're going to make a significant investment, then we should make the kind, I would argue, make the kind of investment which will serve us well for the next 20, 30 years. It is really, as I said, a generational kind of investment. So we are indeed talking about a recommendation that will provide us with a completely new system.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
Through to the director and the manager. We've spent so far $3 million, and one of them was the roof, which was very important. And we spent about 330, I think it is, on the HVAC. But didn't we really spend enough in the last 4 or 5 years to make this building, restore it to where we wanted it to be? Functionally, it's functioning properly, and aesthetically it looks nice. But why the need to go beyond that $3 million right now when that's a lot of money? Yeah, 3 plus another $3 million, and as the Councillor Elmsley had mentioned, this building might not be worth $3 million if it is that. I don't even think it's worth that much, but because it's a unique building and nobody would buy it for anything other than what it's being used right now. But we've already spent a new roof. We've done a lot of really good, important things on this, but why is it that, and especially when we have less people in this building now, and maybe potentially in the next year, maybe half a year, whatever, you didn't think that this was
Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, so I'll try to address, there's a few questions in there. So the existing HVAC system, again, has been expressed through both the report and the presentation, is in dire need of replacement. So yes, we've spent some significant dollars on that facility, and that was required from a standpoint of the base structure in the building envelope itself, the roof, the atrium windows, some of those things, as well. Some of it was interior renovations, large ones, such as the council chambers, that was a corporate direction to proceed with. And then we've been doing some other interior replacements as well. The HVAC system itself, while we've done some work to it, limited work, it is in dire need of complete replacement. So there are 52 pumps on the roof there right now. We can't even get replacement parts for those. So they are basically not just past life expectancy, but we can't replace them as is. So we need to do a full replacement, as Manager Peterson has stated previously. From a standpoint of the replacement of the facility, I've looked it up. The base replacement of that facility and the base value of that facility is $4 million, but that's as it is now. That's not replacing it to what the standards will need to be as per now, 2020. This is as it was built when it was originally constructed. And the final component of that question of the fact that there are less staff in there right now, that's correct. But I don't think we will know where we will be when this pandemic ends. I think the intent is, while working from home, we'll continue on. The intent is to get that facility back to what it was as best as can be, and we need to program that facility to what the maximum capacity is, or could be, understanding that that is what the capacity might be, and we need to ensure that the facility is programmed in a way to allow for that capacity to take place.
Thanks. Just a comment, like when I walk up to this building, when I drive up to this building, when I look at it from the outside, when I walk inside, this is a beautiful building. It's just a perfect mixture of old and new, from Victorian architecture to modern day. I'm awestruck even when I'm inside here. I really think it's a beautiful building. You will not find any building as good a shape as this, and how square it is, and all these buildings and all these rooms. I think it's almost perfect the way it is right now, but anyways, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, but you're talking about the look of the building, right? We're talking about the guts and the operation of the building, which are two different things.
I understand, but I mean,
I'm not going to question, I guess I'm going to ask the question. If we're going to remain here, we can argue about this all day. If we're going to remain here at City Hall and utilize this facility, do we need to do this work if we're going to have employees in here? Do we need to do this or don't we?
To you, Mr. Mayor, if that's a question to staff, then yes, obviously we're suggesting we need to proceed with this work as staff are there now, council's there now, and we only expect that as the pandemic lessens, that use of that facility and capacity in that facility will increase. And to Councillor Ashmore's comments, we completely agree. The building is a beautiful building. Part of that is due to the corporation's investment in that facility, including what council has provided for us, and the rationale for the need for this particular project and this funding is so that we can continue to invest and take care of that asset in a positive manner.
No, and I understand that. I guess I'm just, we're having an argument about whether we need to do this or not, and I'm just, we had 10 years ago, there was a roof on this building that came to council, and council said, no, there's no water coming in. It looks fine. It's all good. And so then we put it off and put it off and put it off. And then the last council had to spend 3 times as much money fixing the roof. And I guess where I'm trying to go is, if we don't do this project, is this stuff going to start breaking and falling apart? And we're going to have to start fixing it at a greater cost regardless. So is this inevitable? And it's really just, look, we just need to figure out, we need to do this. So how do you want to do it? Or what happens? What's your answer if I say to you, what if we don't do it?
Then to you, Mr. Mayor, and to council, I would suggest to you that we'll be coming forward to you at some time in the near future with an emergency expenditure request. And the longer the duration goes on, that emergency expenditure request will be greater than what we're asking for today.
Thank you. Councillor Riley, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Are there many people that would no trouble getting multiple estimates, do you believe, in this business? Because obviously with an expenditure of this kind going out, have you talked to many people about when you're obviously getting estimates?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the council. So again, we've got a design architect that's working on it right now, and they've provided the cost basis for us through also utilizing a price estimator consultant with them. If the question is getting pricing on the actual construction work, then as stated, yes, we'll go to tender, and I would imagine that we will get a significant number of bids on the project, which will only help with what the total cost would be. But from an estimation standpoint of the project, we followed sort of the procedures for moving forward, and we are quite confident that those estimates are accurate. The way that project estimates come forward is that typically they will try to gear their project estimate to what the mid-range of a bid within a tender would be. So as Manager Peterson has stated, there is a potential and a hope that we would in fact achieve a lower price through a tender, because the project estimate cost that's come forward is what would be anticipated to be that mid-range tender.
I would add to Director Shanks, through you, Mr. Mayor, we have already completed the contract documents, and we have completed a pre-qualification of contractors. So yes, there is interest. To the councilor's question, there is interest, and there is a list of contractors who would be qualified to do the work.
Councillor Seymour Fagan?
Hi, thank you. And I understand the HVAC issue, it needs to be replaced at some point. But we were talking fresh air and fresh air into the buildings. And I've noticed in this building and many other city-owned buildings, you can't open the windows. Have we ever thought of having windows that are able to open? Because I know fresh air increases productivity, it just makes people feel better. It's just a simple answer. Be great, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the councilor is quite right. There are different ways of looking at how one brings fresh air into a building. But I'm going to connect my answer to that question back to something else that Councillor Yeo was talking about. And you, Mr. Mayor, were talking about. There are options for how we do this. And it's a question of what the cost would be. For us to change the building completely, to put in a brand new system that would account for having operable windows everywhere, would be a whole different level of design for that space. So bottom line, we have to bring in adequate levels of fresh air. Yes, the standards have increased. If anything, they're increasing further. This project will deliver, it'll meet or exceed the standard for fresh air into the building. We would not be, given the current approach, would not be in a position to say, we're going to add, in addition to that, operable windows to the building. That would be a whole different thing. And in some cases, when you look around the building, you would realize, if you look around, you'll see that there's some windows that you just could not open anyway. They're part of what's called a curtain wall construction. We'd have to literally change the whole exterior of the building in those parts where we've got a curtain wall. So even where we do have windows that could be opened, that would be challenging. And where we have window space, but no opportunity to open them up, that would involve a significant cost in addition.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So maybe when we're building buildings from now on, if we have windows that could open, I think it's important, just for fresh air. Thanks.
I don't think we built this one, but go ahead. It's been here a long time, yeah. Most of our, I think, yeah. Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're in a historic building. In my house, I'm on my third furnace and my third roof. We just renovated the old Lindsay Town Hall. It's a lot of money, but bottom line is I don't see any other options. When the equipment breaks down, I mean, we all do it in our own homes. When the equipment breaks down, as I said, I've bought 3 furnaces, you know, and my second furnace was a complete rewrite. I had to change my entire heating system because I went from hot water rads to forced air. So I have no idea whether $2 million plus is a good price or a bad price. Simply don't have a clue. But if the experts in the room say that's the best price, then I'll support it. And my only question will be is how do we pay for it and over what time are we going to do it?
Thank you. Councillor Elmsley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question on organization structure. Were you envisioning having a project manager, hiring a project manager to do this? I know that in some of our larger projects, arenas and things like that, we have hired a project manager and it has paid dividends for us in the past. And I wondered if there was any consideration given to this in going forward.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I would suggest to you that, yes, the consultant will work very closely with the general contractor and with staff, and to put it into terms that I know Councillor Elmsley is very well knowledge and understanding of, is very similar to the Fenelon Falls Community Center construction, where the consultant will work closely with the general contractor and with staff to lead the project forward.
Thank you. We have no further questions at this point, so I'll get a motion to receive the presentation, please. Councillor Vail and Ashmore, any further questions on the presentation? Then we'll deal with the report. All in favor? That's passed. You have a report in front of you. A recommendation that the report be received. Staff be directed to proceed. Option 1, expedited, 4.25 million plus some, inclusive of HST. That the required increased amount of 2.76 million be funded from the working capital reserve, which will pretty much clean it out. and that future year funding totaling $800,000 for multi-year capital budget project City Hall building systems be released and redirected in the city's long-term financial plan to fund future year capital projects. What is council's wish? Councillor Helmsley?
I will move it. It's a scary amount of money, but I really don't see what our choices are. And it's either that or we're going to be faced with emergency funding down the road or a catastrophe of some kind, and there's all kinds of things like pandemics and Legionnaire's disease, and the evil stuff just goes on and on. So I think we're between a rock and a hard place, and I really don't think that we have any choice but to go forward.
So you're moving it as printed? Thank you. Second, Councillor Dunn? You spoke to it. Do you want to speak to it, Councillor Dunn? No? Councillor Riley?
I'm not opposed to, I realize we got to go ahead, but the only thing is the consideration of funding. Is there any other options for funding, or is there a better option for funding? It would be my question to, like a debenture rather than the reserve, or maybe I can refer to Jennifer.
Well, I don't think it's a better option for funding. It's a different, it can be I think we found out it can be a 5-year special debenture instead of taking it out of the reserve. Paid off over the 5 years. You heard the comment on the special debentures. We keep using them. Some councillors are not in favor of debt, would rather utilize the reserve. We can ask for it to be referred back to December 1st to come back with other financing options if you want to go there. I mean, there's lots of choices we have if you want to look at a different way of doing it. It's just the motion on the floor is as printed.
Maybe to the mover, would that be consideration to bring financial options back to December 1st?
What is the urgency for going to tender?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the council, if that's a question for staff. The urgency is just the fact that we continue to have breakdowns, and the sooner we can get to the work and complete the work, some of those benefits that were provided by Mr. Peterson in the earlier presentation will be realized. If we're talking about a deferral till December the 1st, I don't think that's probably going to have a huge impact, but I would certainly look to Director Stover because from a financial perspective, it would probably be her that writing, at least co-authoring that report to bring forward some recommendations, and I would want to make sure that she is comfortable with that timing.
Yes, I guess the other part of it is that if you go to debenture, you're increasing the cost because there's an interest now, there's an interest component to it.
So your motion stands?
I would suggest that we do it as printed, and that maybe staff look into other financing options, and if there are anything that's better, come back.
You can't do both. I think what the motion that's here is saying a specific way to do it. So we either do that or we refer it back and ask them to come back with other financing options. So,
well, if there's no downside, if 2 weeks is not going to make an appreciable difference in going forward, then we may as well get the financing option.
Well, if we're in agreement that this needs to be done, let's just look at some options on how we can finance it. That's, I think, what the councillor's asking. Do you want to comment, CAO? Ron?
Sure, through you, Mr. Mayor. In reviewing sort of this report and recommendation, we obviously looked at all the options, tried to provide the best one to you at the moment, and I would stand behind this one in a sense that we have a capital working reserve. It's money in the bank as far as I'm concerned. I do share your concerns that it depletes it, but I think if it's work that you deem needs to be done, that's probably the best immediate funding source. If you want to look at reserve replenishment, we have every intention as a follow-up anyways, but happy if you direct it otherwise, to look at replenishing that capital reserve. So there's nothing to suggest that you can't do that in a number of ways that you're already talking about now. But for the purpose of this particular project, that's why the recommendation came forward as printed.
I suspected something like that, so I'll stick to as printed.
So your original motion as printed. So I have a quick question, maybe for Director Stover. So the future year funding totaling 800,000 be released and redirected in the city's long-term financial plan to fund future year capital projects. Why can't we just put that back into the capital close? Why are we not doing sort of what we usually do with funding in the future we don't need? Why can't that go back into replenishing the reserve or whatever that we're using?
So it could. Currently, in the long-term plan, this project was approved as a multi-year project with 400,000 of funding committed for 2021 and 2022. So that resolution is really just saying, let's not allocate that 800,000 any longer to this project. But we would certainly, as part of the long-term financial plan and looking at that reserve strategy, we would come up with a plan to replenish this working capital reserve, determine what the right balance needs to be, et cetera. But we certainly could take this 800,000 and put it back, keep it in the two budgets, and replenish this reserve as part of that. Sort of 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
Okay. Okay. Any further questions on the motion? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Motion passes. Okay, thank you. Thanks, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Next one, last report, Ops Community Center redevelopment update. I guess Craig and Jen, I see, is behind you, if we really want the truth. And we'll deal with her. And I see the motion on the report, that report PRC Ops Community Center redevelopment update be received, and that capital project 9502000601 Ops Arena Community Center be closed, and the 3.867 million in special debenture funding for this project not be utilized, so be taken off. So do you want to give us a quick overview, and we'll go from there?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I certainly will. And that's actually Leanne Donnelly that you can see behind me, the EA to the department. But Jen is also in the room. So if there are questions, one of the three of us will be able to handle it. But the overview is, so the purpose of this report is to update council on the status of report PRC 2020-006, Ops Community Center redevelopment. As council is aware, staff were directed to apply for an Investing in Canada Infrastructure Grant, ICIP, for the complete redevelopment rebuild of the Ops Community Center. Unfortunately, the city was unsuccessful in the grant application, which represented $10.6 million over a 2-year multi-year project. The city was to fund approximately 22% or 3.867 million of the project, and it was going to be funded through a special debenture. The purpose of this report is the need to close project PRC 2020-006, thereby releasing the $3.867 million in debenture funding from this requirement. The Ops Community Center will be opening for normal operations and service for the 2021-2022 season in September of 2021. There are approximately $75,000 worth of work repairs required to the facility ice plant to be able to open for September 2021. Staff will use existing approved funds allocated for another Ops Community Center capital project to complete this work and open for the 2021-22 season. While there is no recommendation on required funding for this facility within this report, staff are using this opportunity to advise that depending on the option chosen for future redevelopment of the Ops Community Center, there will be a need for a capital request and investment of between $2 million and $17 million in the near future. We're happy to answer any questions that there might be.
Thank you, Director. Appreciate it. Sorry, Leanne, I don't have my glasses on today, so I apologize for that. Councillor Dunn, question?
Now with the explanation, I actually understand the report because I read it about 3 times and we're not recommending that we close it down and yet we're taking the $3 million out of fixing it. So I was kind of confused with but now that I've got an explanation, I understand it, and I'll give you the motion.
Motion as printed?
Sure.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Yeo. Do you want to speak to it?
No, I think Director Shanks already did that.
So Yeo, you're good? Any questions on the motion? Councillor Ashmore?
Just had a general question through you to the director. Just wondering why this facility here, which is roughly the same age as Emily Omimi and Little Britain and Oakwood that were built in the mid-1970s, why did this facility have to be deemed to have so much investment in it, as opposed to the other ones that didn't need all this investment? Like, why is it that Ops Arena seemed to be in such dire need of renovation money, and when the other facilities are roughly the same age? I just could never figure that one out.
I think it was council's direction, but I'll turn it over to the director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the council. To be quite honest with you, all of our aging arena facilities that we haven't already invested in. So you take Lindsay Recreation Complex and certainly the Fenland Falls Community Center out of the equation, and then take Woodville Community Center and Bobcaygeon Community Center somewhat out of the equation because of some recent expenditures. And they are all in need of some significant capital upgrades over the coming years. And that was reported to council in some previous reports. The rationale for why OPS was sort of identified as a potential ISIP program was because some of the expenditures for that facility are greater. And while it was built in the same era, the 1970s, as some of our other single pad facilities, it was built differently. It is a smaller footprint. The change rooms are much different. It's not an accessible facility. It's a smaller ice pad. So there are a number of factors that lead towards why there's some increased capital expenditure requirements for that facility.
Thank you. Any further questions on the motion? Call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Any follow-ups? Councillor Yeo?
Are you looking at the options for follow-up motions? Is that the idea, or there's 4 options in the report, so I was wondering if they're there for filler, or were you looking at those options to do something?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if that's a question again for staff, I'm not sure if that's for council or for staff. We've provided that there again for further information because certainly it's anticipated that moving forward, we are going to have to do something with that facility. So there will be a report coming from staff as a recommendation, especially since the grant was turned down by the province, for how we're going to proceed with that facility and the redevelopment. And it's certainly understood by staff through some conversations that there will be a desire in 2021 to look at arena provisions as we move forward. And again, this is background to feed into that process. So nothing at this time.
Thank you.
Me first. No, you go ahead. So, I don't know. I know it's council's direction, but you're reading a report with these options, anywhere from $2 to $17 million. And at what point are we as a council going to make some tough decisions and say, we can't afford to do this. We know we have too many arenas. We've got an old rundown facility. I'm not picking on ops or anything else, but we've seen all the reports. We don't need 10 ice surfaces. You know, we've reallocated, you know, ice from a few arenas to other areas. I know there's lower usage this year. At some point we might catch up, but we know all this information's in front of us, and we know it's gonna, you know, here's a facility that, you know, I'm not gonna say we don't need, because that's an insult to people that utilize it in ops, and I don't mean it like that, but we know we have too many facilities. We can't afford to spend $2 to $17 million when we're coming out of a pandemic. We got to recover as a community. We're going to have other priorities. And at what point do we as a council have a conversation to say, is this the opportunity to maybe, this is a facility that maybe we should just make a decision on and move forward with the other 9 ice surfaces? I mean, I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. We seem to, we're going to put $75,000 in, and I know the direction is to open it up in September 21 and 22, but you said it before, Councillor, we're just kicking cans down the road. At some point, we can't keep going like this, and I'm just talking out loud. Councillor Elmsley?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I was going to make allusion to that somewhere down the line, but when I heard there's a report coming back, I was waiting for the report to come back to do that with options. My question was the 3.7 that we just are putting back into capital, can that go to replenish the working capital reserve that we just depleted?
It's not capital, it was a special debenture that we authorized. We just won't be taking out the special debenture.
There you go. So anyway, as far as Ops Arena goes, I think you're quite right about the number of ice surfaces, et cetera, and it's not being used now, and people are utilizing ice surfaces elsewhere. And as I say, when I heard there was a report coming back, I was going to wait for the report to come back to see what it said and make or support a motion at that time that we not reopen or we not take advantage of utilizing that arena.
And I understand that. I think the report coming back, and the director can correct me if I'm wrong, that the direction right now from council is to refurbish this facility. So the report coming back is options on how much money do you want to spend refurbishing this facility. And I'm just saying, is that really, you've got the options in front of you. We know it's going to cost a lot of money from here to here. I'm just, again, Councillor Seymour Fagan?
Where's the option to not have it as an ice rink anymore? I'm just wondering, and where, can we make that right now, or?
That's our option. We've already directed staff to maintain the ice surfaces and to refurbish ops, so they're doing what we've asked them to do. I'm just saying, at some point, do we look at this and say, you know what, these aren't easy decisions. We know people are going to be upset, but are we ever going to have a better opportunity than right now to cut our losses, reduce some of our facilities? We know we have too many ice surfaces, or do we want to start asking for more recommendations and reports when we know as a council what needs to be done?
Okay, so do we need a motion now?
I'm just talking. We're in a council meeting. You can make any motion you want right now as a follow-up.
Sure. Thanks. I was talking to Craig about it too, and I think I was talking to Councillor Vale, and he was talking about in sometime soon, the beginning of the new year, or whenever we could get the first quarter, he was going to bring forward a suggestion, maybe to CO Taylor. We've got 4 arenas that aren't open, 3 or 4 arenas that aren't open now. We got Oakwood, we got Ops, we got Bob Cajun, I guess is an open name. So I think when we get the report coming back, I think we'll have a better opportunity then to make the decision if there's this wishes of this council to close a couple of arenas, and I think that would be the time to have the fulsome discussion when the report comes back, sooner rather than later. That's my opinion.
Okay, I leave it. I'm putting it out to Councillor Seymour Fagan. You look like you're struggling. You want to say something?
I actually would like to make a motion to close that arena, because it has been, my kids play hockey. We have been there many, many years. It is in bad shape. It is the one that has been in the worst shape over the years. It hasn't been fixed up. We tried to get funding for it. We didn't get the funding for it. It's going to cost a lot of money to do. Do we need it right now? Not necessarily. They can use the other twin pad in Lindsay if they will need another arena. It might be over where the northwest trunk is, maybe in that area. But I think we really need to look at things. I know Omimi's got area for another arena as well. Bob Cajun, we're not using it, and a lot of money has gone into that. So, I just think that we need to be eyes wide open on what we're doing. And the more that we kick it down, it's just going to cost more money. And, it's an arena that's been falling apart for the last, my kids are 19 years. So that's just my opinion.
Okay, so your motion, just so I'm clear, is to that staff not reopen the Ops Arena, and how about as part of that motion that they come back with a report on other utilizations of that, what other future utilizations of that property could be. We're looking for a paramedic base, we're looking for a new home for Victoria Manor. Let's get the whole picture, but if that's acceptable for you as a motion, then I think that covers a lot of it. Are you okay with that?
Yes, because there are so many more uses.
Let me get a seconder, and then you can speak to it. Will you second that? Councillor Helmsley? Okay, go ahead.
Yes, because there are so many other options that can be used in that space. It's close to Lindsay. We are looking for other places to house our other services. It's just, you know, I don't think right now it's functioning or as an arena, and the cost to actually open it up again just doesn't make any sense at this point. So that's all.
Thank you. Councillor Helmsley, do you want to speak to it? No? Any questions? Councillor Riley?
I look forward to a report coming back, but I would speak against the motion because I think if we've heard any of the reports before and Director Shanks can address this, that it's one of the area that, in the area that has most of the future growth. And if we're going to invest in the facilities that we are going to keep open, this is one of the facilities that has most of the future growth around it. So this is what came forward in the report. We're having 10,000 new people come on the west side of Lindsay. We're having another 2,000 or 3,000 people come on the east side close to Ops. So I just think it's premature at this time to support the motion. I'm not saying down the road I won't, or we'll have a further discussion, but I think it's premature right now when the director has supported this area. He can comment if he wishes on other reports that this is certainly a very central and high area growth, the highest area of growth in the municipality. Lindsay's arena is getting old. There's a lot, it's one of our high revenue arenas as it is, and I don't dispute that we have to put a lot of work in. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that, but I just think it's premature at this point without all the other facts coming forward, and that's why I'm not saying, I think we need to get more information. That's my point of view.
No, and you know what, I don't disagree with you, and I think Director Shanks and Jen Johnson in their reports have both made it very clear where they stand. I think this is a political decision, and you know, we need to give some direction, so I respect the fact that you can't support it at this time. In my opinion, most of the growth in the West End, we've got two arenas 5 minutes west of Lindsay that are both underutilized, so you know, there's lots of options out there, and that's, you know, I'm not, that's all I'm saying. I don't think we know Director Shanks' opinion. It's not, you know, he's made that very clear to us, and I think this is a decision this council has to make moving forward, or we just keep deferring and kicking the ball down the road. So any other questions or comments? Councillor Ashmore?
Just, I guess through you, Mr. Mayor, to maybe to the director, or just whoever can answer, like, are we not contradicting ourselves? We're looking at closing facility or facilities, and then we're going to build two new arenas, which could be each 20 or 30 million dollars. Those arenas are not cheap to build. I mean, are we actually saving money closing down an arena when we're talking about staff are saying we have to build new arenas, one to replace Little Britain and Oakwood, one in between, and one in Omemee? Well, I mean, that should have been built in Omemee, but that's a long story. But it's a mile and a half north of Omemee, that facility. But it's working fine. Sure, it'd be nice to have one there, but we're looking at, staff are saying that we should be building two new arenas. So I mean, you're looking at $40 million there. So are we really saving that much money down the road? I don't know.
These are long-term plans, and staff aren't saying we're building two new arenas. We've given direction from staff on the long-term plan for our arenas, and that's part of the long-term contemplation. So it's not staff saying we need two arenas. It's staff saying if we need to continue, eventually we're going to have to build some new facilities. But I think that's regardless. So that's.
Say it or something. There was a consultant said that wasn't maybe not staff, but a consultant, I think, that we had hired at one time.
Mr. Mayor, do you want some comments?
Yeah, I will. The consultant came back saying their report was we're going to have to refurbish or build new arenas, but it also said we have 10 arena ice surfaces and we're really utilizing 8 of them to the maximum. So that was the original direction that came to council. This council chose, or the last council chose, to keep all our facilities open, that staff come back with a plan to refurbish or build new, and that's where some of that direction has come from. This is in contradiction to that direction, but we've got a situation, certain time of going on with the pandemic, and that's, I think, where this motion has come from. So go ahead, Director.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to council. So it is recognized and understood by staff, and in fact, as has been mentioned, previous recommendations made through staff reports or consultant reports are that we are oversupplied with the number of ice pads located within the city of Kawartha Lakes. Way back when it was originally reviewed, the decision was made that based on the community fabric and what those facilities meant to the public and the communities, we were going to continue to maintain that number of facilities. And then that decision has remained throughout, with different ways for how we were going to be able to achieve those numbers. And that's sort of what led to the grant application for the ISIP fund and the Ops Community Center. So again, it is recognized that there is a potential that if the city wishes to reduce the number of ice pads we have, we could. The location of which ones would be closed, that's the debate. And certainly staff and the consultant and all of the stats that we have that relate to use of facilities and revenues generated by those facilities do not point to the Ops Community Center facility as being one that should not be in operation. There are other facilities that have been pointed out through all of those different ways with good rationale and stats behind them for why they should be considered. And my understanding of what might come to be is that there might be a resolution, there might be a request by council to review that again in 2021. And that would be the period of time to do that, to reduce the ice pads that the city has, and to potentially look at what locations they are. That is a political and council decision, but that would be the appropriate time to choose the number and the locations, and to be quite honest with you, for how they would close down. Are they immediate? Are they over time as the asset truly ends its life cycle? So I think that would be the process. I agree with what Councillor O'Reilly's saying. If that is something that council is going to request, again, I've talked about, I think that's coming. There is no specific request for a report on that right now. All that we're saying is that, and we're not looking to spend any money that is not already allocated for that facility. We're going to use a very minor amount of money to be able to operate for the 2021-22 season, so that if council wishes to do a review on that moving forward, prior to their request for any major expense for that facility and location, or any actual expense on it, then council can make that decision. I would state that, again, we have a number of facilities that are nearing that 50 years in age. So regardless of which facilities remain open, there will be a significant need for capital investment in either a refurbishment or a renovation or a rebuild. If it's 8 ice pads instead of 10, obviously the need for capital expense will be less. If you're going with the full 10, it's going to be more. But you know, we've got 5 facilities minimum in that time frame, in that era. They're all coming to the end of life expectancy, and they will all require significant capital investment. So by going to 8, yes, you're going to reduce that potential cost, but there is still going to be some significant decisions and significant investment required by the city.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Any further questions on the motion? You can sum up, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So I just think that we have an opportunity now to do something. That piece of property is close to town. Other things can be housed there, like the paramedics or like our new Victoria Manor. All the building is on the west end of town. I sit on the Planning Advisory Committee. We know that there's building come. We just approved 300 homes. But the amount of people that are coming in that will require an arena, it's a ways away, because the arenas are not being used fully. We've closed 3 and they're still not, even though it's COVID, we're still not in full capacity. I just see it as an opportunity right now. We continue to say we want to do things to save money and not just delaying and delaying and delaying. That's where I stand right now. Like I said, the building is in the West End. Maybe one of the builders, there's many developers over there. Maybe they want to develop an ice pad as well. We just need to look at different things and instead of spending millions and millions of dollars, because if we do refurbish, you know, it might be $500,000, but it could be in the end $3 million, because we've seen that before.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to ask for a recorded vote on this one, so I'll turn it over to Madam Clerk. Nope, that was a sum up. Sorry. What you're voting on?
I wanted to know whether...
Wants to read the motion? Clarity on the motion?
If it included the communities, like the room itself, or just the ice plant?
No, The
is closed.
facility will not be reopened. You want to read it to us, Matt?
The council directs staff not to reopen the Ops Arena and that staff.
Facility, Ops
Facility.
Arena facility.
Facility. And that staff report on options of other utilization of the property.
Yes, that's fine. And I just think everybody needs to know that if this passes now, it can still be, when it comes back to council, you still have the decision to keep it.
Keep it closed? It's okay, you've done a sum up. Yep, this is a recorded vote, so go ahead, Madam Clerk. Your microphones, please.
Councillor O'Reilly,
Opposed?
Councillor Seymour Fagan,
In favor.
Councillor Yeo,
Opposed.
Councillor Vale,
In favor.
Councillor Richardson,
In favor.
Councillor Ashmore,
Opposed.
Councillor Elmsley, Councillor Dunn, Mayor Latham.
In favor. Motion passes 5-4.
5-4.
Okay, thank you. Matters from closed session, we have none. Confirming bylaw for today's proceedings. Mover and a seconder. Councillor Elmsley, Councillor Ashmore, all in favor? That's passed. And a motion to adjourn, please. Councillor Yeo, Councillor Seymour Fagan, all in favor? That's passed. Thanks, folks. And next council's Tuesday, 1 o'clock.